so appreciative of the team at the libraries, and really thank you for stepping up again, as well as all of our city employees. This is a
Good morning and welcome to the October 18th, 2023 Transportation Infrastructure and Planning Subcommittee meeting. We have a quorum, and Councilwoman O'Brien will be joining us shortly by phone. So the meeting's called to order, and I'm going to turn it over to the City Attorney to explain public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the public may speak for up to 2 minutes to comment on agenda items to be discussed. Comments must be related to the agenda item and action being considered by the subcommittee. General comments that go beyond the scope of the agenda item must be made in the citizen comment session at the end of the agenda. Members of the subcommittee and staff cannot discuss or comment on matters relating to pending investigations, claims, or litigation. Additionally, any member of the public who appears before the subcommittee in their capacity as a lobbyist must, as required by Phoenix City Code, disclose this fact before addressing the subcommittee. The City Code requires speakers to present their comments in a respectful and courteous manner. Profane language, threats, or personal attacks on members of the public, council members, or staff are not allowed. A person who violates these rules will lose their opportunity to continue to speak.
Thank you, and I now turn to the interpreter to introduce.
Good morning. My name is Gloria San Miguel. I will be providing interpreter services for our Spanish speakers this morning. Now I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself to the Spanish-speaking audience. Buenos días, mi nombre es Gloria San Miguel. Estaré proveyendo servicio de intérprete esta mañana. Deseamos pedirle de antemano, si es que van a dar un comentario público, por favor, hablar despacio y con claridad, y evite de tener distracciones de fondo. Finalmente, tome pausa después de cada una o dos oraciones para que podría yo interpretar de una manera eficaz, diciendo todo lo que usted está diciendo en una manera completa, lo mejor que podríamos hacer. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with item 1, which is approval of the minutes of the September 20th, 2023 meeting. Do I have a motion?
Move for the minutes. So move.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it. It carries. So I'm going to take some of these out of order because we do have people that want to speak on item 2 and item 3. So I'm going to go to 4, 5, and 6, which are information-only items. Do we have any questions from the subcommittee?
Can I pull item? Oh, you're going to move everything out of order, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're just looking at information items 4, 5, and 6, which deal with the Citizen Transportation Commission, freeway program update, and water services 6-year.
Got it.
No questions on that. So we will move to item 3, which is the Metro Regional Public Transportation Authority and MAG. We have a speaker, Jeff Codwell.
Good morning, Chair, council members. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I know that this is for information only. However, MAG is not a real government entity and should be abolished in its current form. The members and the board are appointed. They are not elected. They should be a regular nonprofit. There is nothing wrong with that. But they create policy that you all implement. And I understand that that is the reason why that you are receiving their information today. But you guys should be the ones that create the policy to let them know what you want, because you represent us. We elected you. We did not elect them. So you should be our middle person to go to MAG and say, these are the items that our people want and don't want, instead of MAG coming here or you going to MAG and then them telling you what policies they want, because they are a private entity and they have non-elected officials who are elected by city council, but then appointed. And so it's not a true representation. And in general, please do not approve road diets, expansion of bus rapid transit and light rail. Implementing these policies that take cars off the road lead to more traffic congestion, more pollution, more crashes, and more serious injuries related to cars. They also force small businesses to go under during the construction and reconstruction of the roads. I do greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does the subcommittee have any questions? This is a standing item, and we just review copies of past and upcoming meeting agendas.
I don't necessarily have any questions. I don't know if somebody's here to speak on MAG, but I can speak on MAG in the sense of we do have a representative, and a representative is there to speak about our voice and about the citizens that sit on MAG. So that is the mayor, and the mayor speaks for the community and for us as we discuss policy and pieces that are needed within our community, and then it's discussed as a bigger collective. So we do have a representative.
Thank you. And I believe there's other subcommittees that also include council members, like human trafficking, and Councilman Waring sits on that. That's just an example. Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, we will now turn to item 2, which is speed limit ordinance changes. I believe we'll have a presentation prior to comments from the public. This is a pretty routine process that comes before the council, I believe, every 6 months or so. I'll turn it over to Alan Stevenson and Keeney, who this is his official last meeting as our street transportation director. So thank you, and we wish you well in your new endeavors.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, for this particular item, we do not have a presentation since it was on for consent, but Keeney can provide an overview, and then we're happy to answer any questions of the subcommittee and go from there.
Maybe you could just briefly explain the routine process that we go through, and I believe we're looking at 12 changes today, and the changes include, I believe, reducing from 35 to 30 miles per hour. So, Keeney, just a brief overview, and then we'll take comments.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, you're correct. This is a process we go through twice a year, usually in the spring and in the fall, where we evaluate the speed limits on our 5,000 miles of city streets, and that's for a variety of reasons we go through this, and some citizens request. Sometimes we're looking at safety data out there, but we go through it, and it is a relatively routine process, and there are a number that we're recommending. The city code portion of this, all of these have to be captured in city code because that allows for enforcement of the speed limits on those roadways. And so we either recommending changes to it, or sometimes we're doing housekeeping changes to make sure the city code matches up with what's actually out on the street.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So we'll go ahead and take comments from the audience who signed up. First is Ethan Schmidt-Crockett. believe he was neutral. Ethan, okay, Ethan is not here. Jay Bieber.
Good morning. Nice to see you. My name is Jay Bieber. I am a member of the city's Vision Zero Community Advisory Committee, speaking on behalf of myself today. With this item, one of the concerns that I had was that within the agenda item and the materials that were presented, that there was the actual studies that were referenced as far as the ones that justified these changes were not part of that. So there's no possibility to review those and have specific comments on whether they seem justified or don't seem justified. But in general, as far as speed limits are concerned, lowering a speed limit does not actually result in lower speeds. All of the studies from the Federal Highway Administration all the way down, studies have been done over many decades, have shown that at best you get an extremely minimal change, if anything at all. Sometimes they go up, the speeds go up, sometimes they go down. So the message that I wanted to impart on this particular item is that just simply changing the speed only makes more violators, and especially in communities where police enforcement has been troublesome for some communities in the past, that could also be an issue. So I'm just concerned that we weren't able to take a look at the studies to see if there was any real specific comments on whether these were justified. But just overall, speed limit lowering does not result in lower speeds. People drive the speed that the roadway is built for, and that's an operational speed. And so the city builds a speed, encourages people to drive a particular speed on that roadway by its built environment, and then if you don't have a speed limit that matches that, it could also be dangerous because most people will still drive the nature of the roadway, but then maybe you have a couple of people who see a sign and slow down, you get speed variation, and actually it's been shown that speed variation is more dangerous than a particular speed if it's 5 miles an hour more or whatever because of those reasons. Thank you.
Keeney, maybe you could briefly explain how they can receive copies of the studies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, as a matter of process, and whenever we have done these changes, we have not attached traffic studies or additional information. We just attach the recommended changes through the city code that we have recommended moving forward with. So Mr. Bieber can submit a public records request, and we can respond to that accordingly.
Thank you. And I believe often when we change traffic patterns, you put up notification.
Yes, if there's a change out there that warrants us to, we'll put up advanced signage to make sure people are aware that there's a traffic control change.
I noticed that on 7th Street at Peoria. It's been up for a while. Thank you. Next speaker, Jay Codwell.
Good morning, Chair, council members. So it's actually 15 changes, and there's multiple miles per hour changes. There's 45 to 40, 30 to 35 to 30. So it's actually going to be impacting a lot. And with that being said, it is inequitable because it will most negatively impact those who are the least fortunate in our neighborhoods. They will not be able to afford the tickets that come with lowering the speed limit. And we've seen this in the past with implementing red light cameras and all that other stuff when it comes to speed limits. So open meeting law in Arizona does say that we need to have the attachments on record to review. And so I highly encourage you to remove this from the consent agenda and vote no, because it is a violation. And if you move forward, then there could potentially be consequences. I don't know what those consequences are. I haven't reviewed the law, and I'm not a lawyer. But I do know that I was not able to see those studies. And when it comes to public records requests, I would probably bet that I wouldn't get the item in question in time before the agenda, before the meeting. and the time that the agenda came out. So I greatly appreciate that you are looking at this and allowing us to speak on a consent agenda item. And I, again, encourage a no vote on this one. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Chief Conley, I don't want to put you on the spot, but could I ask you a question about ticketing? Or, okay, you brought the expert. I apologize. Thank you. I just wanted you to just briefly maybe discuss when you are ticketing, the officer has discretion. First off, it would be nice to have some officers on our motors. I believe we used to have 150 and we're down to about 30, 34. But having said that, if there is a new area where you've changed the speed, does not the officer have the discretion to work with the person that may be pulled over?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, that is correct. The officer does have discretion, and if there was a change and we wanted to initiate with some warnings prior to actually issuing citations, we could do that.
Thank you, Chief. And so I think I understand what people are saying, but in my humble opinion, speeding's out of control in our city, and I think we need to really make sure we're assessing the appropriate speeds on our streets and that we are ensuring safety on our streets. That would be my comments. Anything else from the rest of the subcommittee? Councilwoman Pastor, I see you have a question.
I have a question, and actually I want some clarity from Derek. In other packets that we have received, I have received studies. And so I want to get clarity regarding studies or anything that we do in order to make a decision or a department to make a decision. So my question is that in packets that I get like over 100 plus paperwork, there are studies in there. And I'm at liberty, and public's at liberty, then to be able to read those studies. How do we determine what studies go in our packet and what studies don't go in our packet? And if they don't go into our packet, then where does it go so that the public can read what the study that we're making a determination on a policy?
So, Councilwoman, I think that is a question that's left pretty much up to the department whether or not they want to attach the study to the materials. With respect to this study in particular, there is nothing in the statute that talks about having to disclose the study at all. It just says the study needs to be conducted. Obviously, if the city wants to be fully transparent, it can make the studies available online, assuming, of course, that the study isn't confidential,
right,
and there are no legal reasons why we wouldn't want to. There are other times where departments may summarize the study and include that information in the packet as opposed to attaching the entire study. But it's really up to the department, and it really depends whether or not there's any limitation by statute and whether or not the study is confidential.
Okay. I just feel like we just have to be very process-driven in the sense that we are equal to every department, and there is a policy, and I don't know if it comes from us, but there is a policy regarding what study goes into our packet or doesn't go into our packet, and then those that are confidential, I understand, but then what goes to the public? I think we need, for transparency's sake, we need that in order for people understanding why we're making decisions the way we're making them. I think that's important. So I don't know where that conversation goes. As for public record, now that I understand this, obviously they're going to have to place a public record. How quickly, and I think it's Chief Kennedy, how quickly does a public record then move through so that it's a yay or nay on whatever it is they're asking? I don't know who answers that.
I think it's probably street transportation because they do the study, and it's quite technical in nature, but I know they are available.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Councilwoman Pastor, members of the subcommittee, we would respond to a public record request that's submitted on this for any, just like we do with other public records requests that we get. And there's a time frame attached to get the documentation together and be able to respond appropriately.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, on behalf of the City Manager's office, we understand your comment about including studies, and we'll take that up with the City Manager and staff and have a discussion about that as it relates to going forward. Thank you.
And I appreciate that, but I will tell you, again, we do this routinely, and last time around we did something along Thunderbird, and I did have Keeney come up to my office and we talked about it because we've had a lot of conversation from the residents that live off of Thunderbird between 7th Street and Cave Creek, and he provided all the information to me, and quite frankly, the neighborhood was very grateful for what you did because you did reduce the speed there, and there have been a series of accidents, 2 fatalities, as well as just other types of fender bender accidents. So I appreciate what you're doing. Are there any other questions?
I do. Thank you, Chair. Quick question for you. Are any of these changes you consider to be that we must effectuate in an imminent manner or an emergency manner to ensure the safety of our residents?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Hodge-Washington, I wouldn't necessarily classify any of those categories. That's why we do it twice a year. We just want to make sure we're in a repetitive process to be able to continue to evaluate our speed limits, but also make sure the ordinance is updated and correct. If it passes through this subcommittee today, we would look to have this likely on the council agenda for the middle of November. I think November 15th is what we're looking at. And then from that point, it's usually about 60 to 90 days to make changes actually out in the street and in accordance with whatever changes have been made with the council action.
My concern is, given some of the concerns about the transparency of the study, I was wondering whether or not, from your perspective, if we were to say, to allow your department to determine whether or not this is something that we can share with the public and include in a future subcommittee item, would you feel that to be tremendously burdensome?
I would say that, Councilwoman, that we could make a delay in the approval from council if we needed to be able to respond that way, especially if the council feels it's necessary.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, we'd also make sure that we, as much as we can provide that with public record, we will get that to Mr. Bieber as soon as we can, so that way he can have time to review it before the full council discussion.
Can I add one more thing?
Okay.
Yeah. If possible, I would actually recommend that if we proceed with this as a subcommittee, that when it does go to council, we include that study so that if the public does have conversations and commentary, we include it at that time. They can make that at that time.
So is that in the form of a motion?
I will make the motion, yes, Chair.
Okay.
I will move that we proceed with the, as presented, but ensure that the study is included in the information that goes out in our public packet before it goes to council.
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. And just one other suggestion, in the future, perhaps you just have the studies available online to save some paper.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I was asked to clarify the motion. Is a link provided to the study okay to satisfy what you're requesting, Councilman Hodge-Washington?
Yes, that would satisfy my request.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we'll move on to our agenda and action items. And I see that Councilwoman O'Brien has joined us. Welcome. I know that we had thought about...
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I know we had thought about moving item 8 up before 7, but are we okay going sequence? Okay. So then why don't we go ahead and go on to item 7 now that Councilwoman O'Brien has joined us, and this is a discussion of automated enforcement.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, while Keeney pulls up the PowerPoint here, we do have Keeney and Chief Conley here to answer any questions as you may come up related to the police department. But with that, we're here to provide an overview of the automated enforcement safety program options, and I'll turn it over to Keeney now.
Thank you, Alan. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Glad to be here today to make a presentation and have a discussion with you about automated enforcement safety programs here in the city. This item is for information, discussion, and possible action. I want to point out, obviously, the city's had a very strong focus on road safety over the last several years with the unanimous adoption of the Vision Zero Road Safety Action Plan last year. Road safety is, and I want to make sure, we are doing a lot of things on a lot of different fronts to be able to address road safety. And the item we're talking about here is not something that it would be a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a tool, it's a tactic to be able, potentially, to be able to address our road safety concerns. So we're discussing today is really the early stages of potential to look at an automated enforcement program and bringing that back to the city. So with that, I just wanted to provide a little bit of an overview and update how we got here. So back in June of this year, at the City Council policy meeting, we were providing the findings of a yellow light timing study that the City Street Transportation Department undertook. That was a 12-week study that we did in partnership with the University of Arizona, and it was looking at extending yellow light timings at our intersections across the city. We did a study of 12 intersections, and through that process of looking at yellow light timing, we looked at through movements and left turns. We saw up to a 60% reduction in red light running based on improving or extending the yellow lights at those intersections. Based on that, we got direction from council to move forward with retiming our 1,200 traffic signals across our city, which is going to be a 3-year process. But attached to that recommendation and that direction was a request from the City Council to be able to look and do research on automated enforcement and come back to a subcommittee later this year, which is why we're here today. We did do a small presentation attached with the police department at the Public Safety and Justice Subcommittee earlier this month. So the city, I wanted to give a little bit of update or kind of a history of background here. The previous automated enforcement program that the city had started back in 2001. It consisted of 10 intersections and 2 mobile speed vehicles that were used exclusively in school zones. Then we, over the next 18 years, we had 3 different vendors that were operating the program, and we expanded up to 12 intersections at a time and had up to 8 mobile speed vehicles that were used exclusively in school zone areas. However, in 2019, the program ended. We had an expiring contract at the end of December. We were looking to potentially have a new solicitation and expand the number of enforcement cameras. But in January 2020, the council did not move forward with the program, and so it ended. It was discontinued. So this, kind of a little bit about the red light running crash statistics, and this is both nationwide and here at the City of Phoenix. Nationally in 2020, we had greater than 2 fatalities per day, which totals 928 fatalities in actuality, with over 116,000 injuries across the country due to red light running. Here in the City of Phoenix, this is on an 8-year period that we evaluated. We saw 144 fatalities on our roadways and nearly 11,000 injuries related to red light running crashes. So looking at red light running enforcement of the crash analysis, and this is looking at the 12 intersections because we were anticipating discussion about those 12 intersections. We actually did a before and after study of those 12 intersections. What we found is that those 12 intersections, for the 3 years prior to us installing them in 2015 and the 3 years after installing them in 2015, we saw a nearly 31% reduction in red light running crashes in all directions. And since those cameras that were at those 12 intersections only monitor certain directions of movement of travel, in the directions of travel it monitored, it was nearly a 60% reduction in red light running crashes in those directions of travel. Citywide, at the same time that we did the study, the before and after study, we saw nearly 15% increase across the city in collisions and nearly a 4% increase in injuries and fatalities across the city. So we did a little bit of research as well, looking around the valley and who uses automated enforcement. And there are 4 cities in particular: Chandler, Mesa, Scottsdale, and Paradise Valley. These cities obviously range in size and different from City of Phoenix, but you had anywhere from 13 intersections in Paradise Valley all the way up to 500 in Mesa. And here in the city of Phoenix, to remind you, we have 1,200 signalized intersections. So their program sizes are pretty much roughly the same as what City of Phoenix had back in 2019. And I'll get into a little more detail on each one of these different types of enforcement that they use or can be used in the coming slides. So the 5 different types of enforcement technology that's out there when it comes to this is most commonly used here in the Valley is red light running enforcement, speed on green enforcement, fixed mid-block speed, portable speed towers, and then the mobile speed vehicles. And so I'll go through each of those. So the first one, we're talking about the red light running systems, and these are used at intersections, and they can monitor activity at the intersection both before and after changes in the red lights. And this is a location here in Paradise Valley, actually at Lincoln and Tatum Boulevard. And the idea here is that it is able to capture what happens before and after a red light violation at an intersection. The same kind of equipment, and this is equipment location here in Scottsdale. This is speed on green, which these systems can be combined with the red light running cameras, so they can actually evaluate speed through the intersection, both through the green light and also yellow and red lights if there's violations of red light running as well. So these are typically activated not at the speed limit, usually about 10 to 11 miles an hour over the speed limit before a violation is issued. And this is a location on Scottsdale Road and Thomas Road in Scottsdale. So here's another location. This is one that City of Mesa is exclusively using is a fixed mid-block speed. And this is one to be able to capture on roadway corridors that you might have speeding activity going on that you want to be able to have additional enforcement in here. So this is something to be able to be just outside the intersection as well, to be able to hit all areas of a roadway issue that may have speeding. Then we have portable speed towers that are actually can be movable and can fit in areas where we might not have the room and otherwise. So these ones are a little bit more, can move around where you might see trends and speeding activity going on the city streets. And this is one that's used in Scottsdale. And finally, mobile speed vehicles. These these are used by most of the different cities as well, but in our case, these are actually photos of our vehicles we had back in 2019, and that were used exclusively around speed limits or school zones. And I will noted that when you're talking about violations in these ones in school zones, that isn't a 10 or 11 mile an hour over the speed limit. This is strictly enforced. There's a zero tolerance for speeding around school zones as it should be. So when we get into data collection process, and this is something that I think I want to make it clear, and as the council wants to make it, I'm sure it's clear if we move forward with this, is that the process to do how we cite these and how we use these need to be clear, consistent, transparent, and data-driven. And at the first and foremost, I think safety has to be the forefront of what we do, because that's why we would be doing this. So back in 2020, our team put together a proposed objective process to look at data and how we would cite these traffic intersections and how we would put enforcement cameras out there. So before we get into that, I wanted to talk about how the data actually comes in. The first comes from crash reports the police department puts together when they see collisions out on the roadway. That's then forwarded to the state. The state takes time to compile the data, not just from Phoenix, but from all the different agencies around the state. That can take sometimes 6 to 8 months to complete after the end of the prior year. And then finally, we take that data and use that to be able to evaluate how it impacts our 5,000 miles of streets, our 1,200 signals that we have. So one of the biggest issues back in 2020 was really how do we locate these? There was concerns about why are these cameras or why are these red light running cameras and the locations that they are. So when we were looking at this back in 2020 to be able to potentially change the program, we came up with some evaluation methodology and selection criteria that could be used and if a program was to move forward here. And the first thing we wanted to be able to look at was red light running crashes. Where do we have those crashes activity having? So you use data to be able to determine where these camera locations would be. Then we'd also look at serious and fatal red light crashes, and especially those areas where you have, because the whole point of our road safety action plan is to be able to reduce serious injuries and fatalities on our roadways. So using the data to drive that decision making. And then finally, if we had a process that actually took into account pedestrian crashes where the driver was found to be at fault and it had involved red light running as well. So those are the 3 main things that we looked at. The one bullet point on here that wasn't part of our analysis in 2020 that I wanted to highlight here was red light running detection equipment. That's available to us today. If the council remembers back in January when we did an update on the yellow light cameras, one of the actions that council asked us to do was to go and look at the top 100 intersections that MAG produces to look at, those are based on crash risks, and the ones that are in Phoenix that we can install additional camera equipment to be able to monitor the safety of those intersections, we should do. And we're actually in the process of procuring that equipment, and we're going to be installing that at the intersections. But it doesn't just monitor things like yellow light time and things like that. It has the ability to be able to detect and observe red light running. So we could be able to use this red light running equipment at our intersections before we make a decision to be able to actually install red light running cameras or speeding cameras. So you're using data, again, to be able to drive decision making. So when you look at the location selection process, and this is something that we had put together back in 2020, and so I'm just going to walk you through just an idea how you might go about selecting a location to be able to look at automated enforcement. So when we did this back in 2020, we had evaluation criteria that looked at those red light running crashes, the serious and fatal injuries caused by red light running, and also pedestrian-related accidents caused by a driver. We assigned a value of those of 10 each, 5 each, and 5 each to be able to help score or be able to evaluate an intersection. So how does it look like in an individual intersection? Now, keep in mind this is in 2020, so the data we used was back 2016 to 2018. But when you look at that, we had 18 northbound crashes involving red light running at this intersection of 27th Avenue and Adams. Having the evaluation score of 10 on that, that gives you 180 points or score. Then if you look at the serious injury fatalities, there was 3 at that intersection. That results in 5 evaluation score, and that a total of 15. And then you go to the pedestrian side, we had 0 pedestrian fatalities, thankfully, at this intersection. But if it had a score of 5 there, it would be the resulting subtotal. Now, when you add all those together, you have a score of 195 for this particular intersection. And at the time, back in 2020, this was our most highest risk intersection when it came to red light running. So when I talk about the location methodology of putting these red light cameras out to begin with, that was a concern back in 2020. One of the other big concerns was equity. How do these cameras potentially disproportionately focused in areas that are traditionally underserved? Since equity was a primary concern, I wanted to cover this map in particular, and so I'm going to explain what you're seeing here. This is our high injury network map, which comes from our road safety action plan. This was a map that was put together with 5 years of data that showed not just where all of our collisions are, but where we have the highest incidence of collisions, where there are people who are dying or getting seriously injured on our roadways. So what you see here is on the pink dots that you see on the road or on the map, those are actually our 68 intersections that are our highest incidence of crashes and that result in serious injuries and fatalities around the city. Then if you look at the bluish green lines on there, those are our 87 road segments in the city that have a higher incidence of serious injuries and fatalities. Now when you look at an overlay of equity data on there, you have the hatched areas on the map that show the U.S. Department of Transportation Justice 40 areas, which are, just to remind everybody, that's to guide transportation improvements and investments to address inequities that disproportionately harm low-income and communities of color across America. And then the bluish areas in there, the purple areas, are equity analysis that our staff conducted based on U.S. Census data from the 2021 American Community Survey, which reflects block group characteristics based on age, race, poverty, and vehicle ownership. So when you see this overlay of where our serious injury fatalities are at the intersections, the road segments, they are predominantly in areas that are covered by those hatched areas and the bluish purple areas where you have those equity concerns. So the balance of trying to address road safety and trying to balance equity concerns is a valid one. I mean, they're coincidental when you look at this map, and I want to make sure that is, and this is based on data. This is data showing you where our issues are when it comes to road safety. As street transportation director, although my time is short, my main focus is being able to keep people safe on our roadways.
Can I just kind of stop you there for a moment? Just a
Please.
quick question, looking at that map. Is also part of the issue, too, and looking at this map, this is areas that are much more populated and older parts of the city where the engineering designs may not be what they should be and what standards we would have today. So I'm looking up at the Desert Ridge area where there seems to be no accidents, and of course that's a newer built area of the city as opposed to areas in Laura, your district, which is probably one of the oldest areas of the city because you have a lot of the historic districts. So is that a little bit of it as well? It's just where the population is and when it was built?
So, Madam Chair, council members of the subcommittee, the one thing I point out is there are a lot of factors that drive what's happening on our high injury network. It could be red light running, it could be speeding, it could be a number of factors. And so when I go back to my opening comments, it's about having the tools in the toolbox to address what's actually going out there. So we wouldn't look at this and say, oh, everything's here is red light running related. It's about getting into the data and seeing what's actually happening at these intersections, these roadway segments, what's causing these serious injuries and fatalities to occur. And that helps drive whether automated enforcement is the right tool in the toolbox to be able to address what's going on at these locations. It could be additional engineering improvements that we could do, medians, street lights, modernized traffic signals, those kind of things. So I did want to mention, when we look at the data, it might tell us to go in a certain way where we're trying to put these, but there are additional considerations that could affect our ability to be able to install an automated enforcement equipment. One is available right-of-way. We would also be able to have to evaluate it for underground utility conflicts that might keep us from being able to put something there, and also upcoming construction projects that could impact the equipment for automated enforcement. And then finally, sometimes we're bordering on other jurisdictions, so we have to work directly with them to see if we can actually install that equipment at those locations. But either way, if we were in a situation where we had an automated enforcement program and one of these factors came into play, we would document that, so that would be something that people would know further. It was like, why didn't we put it at this intersection, if that makes sense. So I wanted to transition into a little bit talking about contract pricing models, because this is another source of contention when we talk about automated enforcement program is they talk about the vendors and how that works. But there's different ways, and we looked around the country and a lot around the valley about how this happens. The first way this ended up happening is through a citation share model. And this kind of thing is there's no upfront capital outlay or any money from the city. We do have to have staff time to be, and all these different models to be able to, from the courts and from police department, to be able to validate the citations and be able to run it through the process. But everything else, owning the equipment, operating the equipment, all those kind of things are traditionally on the vendor to be able to provide that. The citation share, it requires nothing on the part of the city to be able to contribute. It just means that the citation share of of the fines that come in, a greater portion is provided to the vendor than the city, and it's something that's negotiated. The second one is a subscription. So this one, the citation fines come to the city, but the city in turn provides a lease cost or lease payment to the vendor for each one of the equipment locations. And then the one that's most commonly used is the hybrid model. That's here in the Valley, and that's where we do have a lower monthly cost for that equipment, but we do end up retaining the citation share of revenue, and we split that with the vendor there. So these are three different types of models using an outside vendor. The last one is an owner, where the city would own the equipment and operate the equipment. However, it's been in the past, but most cities out there that are doing this are moving away from it because of the large cost to be up front to be able to handle it. So this is for information, discussion, and possible action, but there's different areas here that you might want to weigh in and talk a little bit about. And so I wanted to kind of guide the discussion a little bit to see and break it up. So if you have any concerns, anything you'd like to talk about, we can go through that. So the 5 areas I want to kind of go in the next slides are these 5 here. The types of enforcement you have out there, the site selection methodology, the number of sites we might have in a program like this, what kind of contract type we might want to have on here, and then any overall automated enforcement feedback you might want to provide. Each of these have one slide except for the first one, which has 2 slides, but I'm going to go through those really quickly, and I'll pause on each one of those if you'd like to provide feedback to us, because right now this is not for, we're not bringing back a recommendation as staff. We'd like to hear from the subcommittee members on where you'd like to guide this program if it's something you would like to move forward with. So the first one is the types of enforcement. I'm just going to briefly, so you have red light running, again, speed on green, fixed mid-block speed, portable speed towers, and mobile speed vehicles. And this could be something, or there's any of these that you are in favor of or want to have as part of a program, or there's ones you don't want to have part of the program. We're just looking for your guidance here on this. So I'll pause.
Do you want us comments now, or?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Well,
yes, Madam Chair.
I mean, I guess I could say I want them all, but I do think red light cameras are important, and I think the mobile speed enforcement, which I think is similar to what they do in Paradise Valley, would be my top two priorities. I just 2 Sundays ago, we had a red light runner hit a motorcyclist at 7th Street in Bell, and I'm not even sure if the motorcyclist survived, but I know he was in pretty bad shape. And like a week before that, we had a pedestrian hit at 7th Street in Greenway, so something's got to give. And I do think we need to look at some types of tools, and so Chief Kenny, maybe you could kind of briefly tell us where we are with regards to traffic enforcement, because for many years we've always relied on our motors, and we just can't do that much anymore, correct?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, that is correct. Although our officers are very effective in forms of doing traffic impact programs across the city to impact those areas where we're seeing those higher incidents of collisions or greater elements of speed, there's not as many as we've had in the past. So that, you know, to say that they're stretched thin is an understatement, but they are out there every day making an impact. I think what this technology does is it serves as a force multiplier. Although you don't have the expertise of a sworn officer who can impact several avenues of traffic enforcement beyond speed and just red light cameras, it does add an extra element to where we can focus on those areas where we want to put those sworn officers in place.
And I mean, our goal really is that we recruit enough officers so that we can then again have a robust motors program, correct?
Correct. Yeah, our goal is always to add to our traffic enforcement motors as we can, and the precincts do their part as well. It's just the traffic enforcement unit can focus on this on a full-time basis.
Thank you. Are there any comments from other council?
Chairwoman.
Oh, Councilwoman O'Brien.
Sure. Thank you so much. Chief, can you talk about what our traffic unit numbers were when we were fully staffed as a department and what they are today?
Sure, Madam Chair, Councilwoman O'Brien. So in the early 2000s, we had over 130 traffic enforcement motors, and now we're right around 40 serving in that unit.
Thank you, sir. So as much as we are, as the chairwoman stated, trying to hire and fill those vacancies, because I'd love nothing more than to have those vacancies filled and have our officers patrolling our streets related to speed and red light enforcement, we are a little short now, and this would help. The technology would help our officers, correct?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman O'Brien, that the technology would serve as an asset to what we're able to do to impact driving behavior in the city.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilwoman Hodge Washington.
I have some thoughts about the mode of enforcement, but I'll wait until you present that. For my preference, I think we probably should be looking on the speed on green. I think that finds a better balance between those that are concerned about the inadvertent running of a camera. I think having the speed component locked into the mechanism would be helpful, and that's with respect to the intersections that we have determined that they're compatible with and have the greatest need. I had one question for you regarding the high injury network. We did the slide before that talked about the calculation of the score, how the scores were determined. Can you give me a little bit of background as to what the minimum score was that was used to determine whether or not an intersection entered into the high injury network? I know it's a loaded question.
Yeah. So, thank you, Madam Chair, Councilwoman Hodge Washington. Yes, if in our road safety action plan, there was a certain number of fatalities that were happening at each of those intersections of the roadway segments that allowed them to be on there. So if you took all of, it evaluated more than 5,000 serious injury and fatality accidents that had happened, collisions that had happened over the city over a 5-year period. And then we took which locations had the most out there. And so that's what rose to it. So it did have, I think it was around 12 or 5 or something. I'd get the exact number. I'm sorry, I didn't have it right now. So.
No worries, but thank you. It confirmed what I thought you were saying, is that these are the most, you use the word deadliest because these are the ones where we're losing Phoenicians' lives and other residents' lives at. So while I'm not necessarily a fan of anyone getting a ticket, I am a fan of protecting our residents from behavior that we can possibly curb. And I think also, like the chairwoman said, we do see a change in behavior when people know there is an increased risk of enforcement. So if it saves additional lives, I think that is something that we should be in favor on. With respect to the corridors, my preference would be either the portable speed units or the mobile speed vehicles, because that gives us the flexibility. If we see a change in behavior, we are able to adapt more readily versus a fixed mid-block speed. May just lead us to may lead drivers to take that speed to another corridor. So those are my preferences.
Thank you. Councilwoman Pastor.
I'm actually in preference with the mobile speed vehicles. I believe these are what are used in the school zones. So that's really where my support is for the mobile speed vehicles to be in school zones. Because I know that there was one point when we were, I've been on this topic for quite some time, that in 2019, when it didn't move forward, at that moment, the conversation became, well, if we don't move this forward, then the school zones aren't protected. So on my part, I'm saying I'm willing to do the mobile speed vehicles, but only in school zones. So I just want to be clear on that, for safety reasons. And I understand all the other pieces, but I have other comments towards those other pieces. But that's where I'm at today.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Councilwoman
Thank you,
O'Brien.
Madam Chair. I want to speak in support of having red light running enforcement, as well as both portable speed towers and mobile speed vehicles. One of our own officers, in the not too distant past, was killed via a red light running accident. Officer knew, and so I think it is imperative that we provide this technology based on data, have it data-driven for red light running, and then being able to move the mobile speed vehicles or portable speed towers to areas where we're seeing, frequent high speeds as well as accidents, I think is beneficial to our police department as well as our community members. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, moving to the next slide. And these are ones that are less common. I don't think any of them are used around any of the cities in the valley, but you have potentially a school bus stop enforcement if we had issues there, railroad crossing photo enforcement, construction work zone enforcement, and license plate recognition systems. I wanted to put them up here because there are cities out in the country who do use these types of enforcement, but I'm not sure if that's something the council is interested in any of these as part of a potential program.
Are there any thoughts on these types of enforcement? Okay. Councilwoman Pastor.
What is the school bus stop enforcement? Please explain these options.
What I would understand in this one is maybe some school zone areas, and I'd probably be mobile enforcement where you're looking at school zones where you might have, or school bus stops where you have a high incidence of people not adhering to the school bus rules, and so you might be putting it out there to make sure that people are stopping so that would be an automated enforcement targeted to that. It's not something that you, like I said, used here in the valley, but that's would be the intent.
Okay, so would it be the mobile, what we just discussed, or?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Which we originally had. Okay. And then the railroad crossing photo enforcement, I'm assuming that's if somebody crosses and the cross barriers or
That's correct, Councilwoman.
are coming down and there's an incident. At least we have some footage. Okay. And the work zone enforcement?
That would be likely be mobile as well, where there are construction work zones where you wanted to make sure that people are obeying the traffic laws and speed around work zones.
Okay.
As far as the work zone, would you have warnings, or, because I-17 is just an entire work zone, and they've reduced the speed, and they have the cameras that flash and read your speed, but they're not necessarily enforcing.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Okay.
And so this would be something where it'd be a long-term, probably a work zone project that you could put one out there if you had concerns about that. But that's, again, dependent upon if that's something the council is interested in at this time.
Oh, okay, thank you. Do you have any?
And then the license plate.
Chairwoman.
Go ahead. Councilwoman Pesser?
And the license plate recognition system, is that just recognize the license, take a picture of the license plate versus a photo?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, I think this is more when some of the real crime information that some cities around the valley, notably Glendale, has, where they use license plate readers to be able to assist law enforcement. I don't know if there's anything Chief would like to weigh in on that one.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, the license plate readers obviously provide information if there's a crime in progress and the vehicle happens to pass one of these readers. It also indicates if a vehicle has been stolen and gives an indication to law enforcement that a vehicle had just passed an area that is stolen.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Councilwoman O'Brien, did you have a question or a thought?
I did want to just share with the committee that I had talked with somebody about the school bus photo enforcement for the school bus stop. And there is technology where it's actually on the bus. So when they put the stop signs out, if someone runs that stop sign, it's like a photo enforcement of that as well. That is another option. It's not something I'm ready to look at right now, but that is another option to it as opposed to just being mobile at bus stops. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Pastor?
Okay, so I appreciate what Councilwoman O'Brien has stated, but that normally, my understanding, is that if the technology that we're speaking of is inside the bus, is really looking at the behavior of the bus driver and the students of whatever incident happens inside the bus. Unless there's a different technology that we're speaking of.
There was potentially other school bus stop enforcement that Councilwoman O'Brien's talking about. It would be cameras outside the vehicle that would be monitoring both ahead of and behind the school bus and be able to monitor drivers that would be not stopping when they're supposed to stop. But that would be something through the school districts working with the police department to be able to work through that. But if we're going to do a program like this, it would probably be more in this mobile speed vehicles at bus stops where we had concerns like that.
Okay, thank you.
Next.
Thank you. Next one is site selection methodology, and I'm just, our primary thing is safety focused, but as we talked about before, using data and crash history, be able to guide decision making, using the high injury network, any prevalence of red light running we detect with the equipment that we have out there, and then also looking at the prevalence of speeding, because that same equipment that will look at red light running at our intersections can also look and detect what speeding activity is going on there. So really this comes down to, are these the right selection methodology to be able to select locations for enforcement, or is it something that you would want to be just focusing on the red light running piece? Or is there something else you'd like us to factor into selecting these locations?
Thank you. Again, one of my biggest concerns is red light running, and and speeding. I mean, I get day in, day out complaints about those two issues. And I do think we need to be fair in our site selection. We need to be focusing on the areas that really we're seeing the most accidents and fatalities. And if that means it's all in one part of the city, so be it. We've got to make our streets safe, in my humble opinion. Are there any other thoughts or comments? Go ahead, Councilwoman Pastor.
I guess I was trying to hold back, or hold it myself to the point towards the end. But I think I'm just going to enter. So through this presentation, and I know we're not completely over, that's why I wanted to wait, but this was titled Automotive Enforcement Safety. And what we have originally have been speaking about, and the dialogue has been really around red light cameras. So what I'm hearing and reading right now is there's a shift in the conversation in the sense of, if we're going to, if we want automotive enforcement, what tools do we want? And basically, do we want red light cameras, or do you want school bus enforcement, or do you want enforcement around these pieces to add more technology? But really the true conversation is really about red light cameras. And in the end, because that's where the controversy really is around the red light cameras. And so I'm just trying to get clarity as to how, I understand how we changed the title and everything, but I'm trying to get clarity. Are you asking us for direction on what types of options, or do we want to use these types of options? And then the type of enforcement technology of number 1 and number 2. Do you want also enforcement in schools, railroad crossings, and all these other pieces? That's what I'm hearing. And then thirdly, I'll go to the license plate recognition. It sounds like we're using this technology a lot wider and bigger than just the red lights. So I want clarity around all that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, members of the subcommittee, I'll put this in. Right now, when we look at automated enforcement, there's a lot of ways to be able to define that and what it might look like. And there's a lot of cities around the country who are using automated enforcement to do a lot of different things. But if the council wants to move forward potentially with a program, we want to be able to bring those boundaries down to what works for City of Phoenix. And so school bus stop enforcement or license plate readers may not be part of that program. But in our previous program, we had red light running, and the only speed enforcement we had was at school zones. Is that something we want to repeat if this program comes together, or we want to look at speed on regular roadway corridors because speeding has become an issue? And if you talk to police, the biggest things that cause serious injuries and fatalities on roadways are failure to yield, people turning where they're not supposed to and not obeying red lights or traffic control out there, or speeding. So if we're focused on road safety, it's really to figure out what this would look like. So if this moves forward for any kind of council action sometime in the future, we want to be able to bring that down so you have a good package to be able to understand this is what it includes, this is what it doesn't include if you want to move forward with this.
And can I clarify, to me, one of my priorities, so I keep saying red light cameras, that's my priority, but I'm hearing it's school safety with you, and I think that's why the title of this really was about automated traffic enforcement devices. So I think staff's looking at what different tools do they want, what are our priorities. Clearly, red light is something that's important to me. school districts and speed enforcement in those areas are important, but so is speeding on our major thoroughfares, because I get a lot of complaints. I can list the streets in order: Greenway, Thunderbird, Bell, and 7th Street. But I think that's what they're trying to hear is what does everyone collectively, what are your concerns? And then they can kind of zero in. And it may be also you say, I don't want any of it. And I think the staff wants to hear that as well.
I now understand, because the reason why I'm asking these clarity questions is because I thought we were taking an action today, because it says possible action. So that's why I'm like, wait a minute, there needs to be a bigger discussion around these pieces. And so now I understand, or have that, okay, this is just a discussion. There could be a possible action, but I don't think we're ready for a possible action. So that's where I was like, wait, are we? So thank you for all the clarity.
And again, just to clarify, I think if we all said, yeah, these are the two things we want, then we could move forward. But it sounds to me like we need to have more discussion. I think that's what staff is looking for. They had an introduction at public safety as well, and got comments from that subcommittee. So I think ultimately it'll probably end up at council at large, and I think it'll probably have to be a policy session. I think it's going to be something that we all have to discuss and decide if we do want it, how do we roll it out? How's it going to work? So it's a bigger discussion. But I think for me, roadway safety is such an issue. I hear it all the time in my district, and it's very concerning to a lot of my residents, especially the speeding and the intersection fatalities.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, if I could just interject, this item on the agenda is on there for possible action, but the slides go through and talk about we're looking for input from staff, and that is precisely why, as Keeney's went through this, we've stopped to ask for some comments, which is not traditionally how we would do. We would just go through and present and say, here's a staff recommendation. You guys, can then ask any questions. And so we're trying to be deliberate in seeking input when there's a big breadth of options as it relates to automated enforcement, so that we can start to have this dialogue with the council.
Okay, are we asking for guidance right now, or are we going to finish the slides? Or I'm ready to jump in, but however you want.
Because, as Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, members of the subcommittee, because of what Alan talked about, there's such a large piece to talk about. We were trying to break it up into individual things. So if there's any comments or suggestions or feedback on site selection methodology that we're talking about here, this is a good time to be able to provide that.
Thank you, Chair. Respect to the site location, the data that we seem to be relying on, I think it's through 2020 or 2019. Is any efforts going? I would prefer that we make some efforts to at least update that data to make sure it's more prevalent to what we are actually seeing now. That would be my preference in determining our site location, making sure our data is a little more up to date and current.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilwoman O'Brien.
Thank you. So, in addition to you, I've heard many concerns from our community members that, aren't, unlike when we were looking at bringing the drones here to Phoenix for our public safety folks. What if in the process we directed staff to hold community meetings in every district to work out and draft a policy to ensure that cameras can't be misused, just like we did with our drones? I was very supportive of that, and I'm always supportive of more community input. I think after we provide input to the staff today, I think based on that, then they could go get additional community input and bring back an actual staff recommendation to subcommittee.
You may not see this, Councilwoman O'Brien, but you're getting some heads shaking up here at the dais. You're right. We did have a pretty robust program when we talked about the drones, and I think that worked out quite well. And then it came back to council, and I think we had a plan to roll out. So I think that's probably a good suggestion. So I'm going to turn to staff and say, is that feasible? Would you be able to work on that?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, that could be definitely, I mean, we've heard that through some of the individual briefings with you as well, that before something goes forward at some point in time, because even if the council decided that we want to move forward with something today, it's going to take time to go through a process before you even see anything out there. So there's times to be able to craft a program around that. So I think public input and outreach is something we could incorporate in this as well.
Okay, thank you, Chairwoman and Keeney, for that. I just want to add here at this point that, I am very supportive of red light running enforcement. I also want to be looking at ways that we can deter speed, not just in school zones, but on our city streets. That is a huge concern in my communities. I was just at a community meeting on Sunday where I heard, about a half a dozen comments about speed being an issue in their streets. I think that the site selection methodology that you have presented here, Keeney, provides a lot of good places, for data. I also want to make sure that it would be, throughout the city so that we're not just concentrating it in a couple of districts. And then in addition, whatever we choose from the contracting type, and I think, it should be a type that does not put the city in an onerous position of having to maintain a lot of equipment or have a lot of large initial ongoing costs. I would want to make sure that it is either, revenue neutral or any revenue generated would be used for the safety of our streets and protecting our citizens in that way. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Are there any other comments or thoughts? Would you like to proceed with other slides, or should we maybe have staff come back with a suggestion on how to roll it out by district so that we can have separate meetings in our districts and get more input from the public? Okay. Okay.
My preference would be that you complete the presentation, because I know we do have a number of members of the public that are here as well that would like to speak, and I think this could be part of the beginning of the information gathering stage for the department.
I'm fine with that. I'll just come back to number 2 at the end.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next item kind of for discussion here is really how big the program would be. We had 12 cameras and 8 mobile vehicles over for our 5,000 miles of streets and our 1,200 signalized intersections. So it's really, you've got a lot of area to cover. Does 12 cameras do it? Is that something we would want to expand if we're going to have a program going forward? What is really the tipping point to be able to influence driver behavior and make our streets safer? And then I think the one thing that would be a key point of a program if you went forward is to be able to grow and expand it. You don't necessarily have to start with your end goal. You could start it out with the worst areas or the most highest priority areas and then work towards what we think is necessary to be able to have an influence on driver behavior. So this is really kind of, is 12 cameras what you want to move forward with, or is it something larger, expandable, scalable?
Are there any comments or thoughts? Councilwoman?
No, the only thing is we would have to do the data to make sure we have what's a reasonable sample size for what we're trying to accomplish. Once we determine what the goals are, we need to determine what's a reasonable sample size.
Pastor?
I agree with my colleague that I like to work backwards, understand what the goal is, and then work backwards, and then look at really the data and how pure it is.
Then moving on to the next one was the contract type, and we already kind of heard from Councilman O'Brien already on this one, that we presented these 4 models here, with the hybrid one being the most common in the Phoenix metro area. Didn't know if there was a preference here, or if this is something you allow staff to be able to look at to make a decision on a proposed program.
And I would agree with that. I do want to make sure that we're doing this for the right purposes. We're not here to make money. We're here to make sure that we're enforcing good behavior on our roads. So if that can be a part of the model, that would be my thought. Any other?
I would share the same, the goal. If the goal is to truly kind of change our driver behavior, we want to make sure that any contract model that we have accounts for that, that it's not a revenue source for the city. It is simply to help us be able to execute this program if that's what we decide to do. And my initial thoughts on this, and I would like to get, I think it's one of the things we can see what the community thinks about it as well, but maybe our enforcement mechanism is not, if we have a staggered enforcement mechanism, especially since we're talking about communities that are underserved and have economic disparities. We want to make sure that we are, again, protecting the lives of those residents while at the same time not making the learning curve very expensive and difficult. So it may mean for us to have a period of time where they receive a warning, maybe the second, within that time period, depending on the gravity of the situation, of course, we would have to make sure we have adequate guidelines on how that would work. So I would just simply say whatever contract model we present, it kind of correlates with the goal of trying to adjust roadway safety. And my proposal would also be that any revenue generated from this does go not to general fund, but maybe to be continue to be invested in our roadway safety and our Vision Zero program.
So you're suggesting having a trial period where we're not actually enforcing, but rather educating, so if they do indeed get caught by some enforcement tool, it's not that they have to pay a ticket, but it's rather, hey, we're just trying to make you understand that in our city, we want you to slow down and abide by the traffic rules?
Yes, it could be a combination. I mean, like I said, I would like to hear from other stakeholders in the community regarding what that looks like, but there might be, not only are we educating individuals on the importance of slowing down on the roads, but ensuring that they understand what the consequences of that is also follow.
Gotcha.
So
lead with education, not enforcement.
Correct, not necessarily. It's an enforcement mechanism, but I think we want to make sure that we are doing it in a way that achieves the goal that we're trying to accomplish.
Correct, I got that. I think that's a great idea. Councilwoman Pastor?
I think we lead with education like we always do, and then we lead with education, and then 2 and 3 and 4, then it becomes something very different. But Chief Kennedy, what I would want to know is if I ran a red light and I get pulled over at that moment, or no, say, I'm thinking of red camera. If I get pulled over first by a physical officer and say, I ran a red light, and they pull me over and they say, okay, you just ran a red light. What was happening? Or, you ran a red light right in front of me. And I turned around and said, okay, I made the determination at that moment that if I slammed on my brakes, I'd be in the middle of, obviously I was speeding, but I would be in the middle of the intersection in a red light. So I chose to keep going, or else I could create an accident at that moment as I'm speeding. At that moment, there's a judgment call, or subjective, it's really a subjective decision. Does the police officer give a ticket, or does the police officer then educate and say, then that means you were speeding and you could not stop fast enough, because the cause would have been you would have been in the middle of the street. So you determine, are you in the middle of the lane or in the middle of, or do you run? And at that moment, the police officer will determine if I get a ticket or not.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, the officer would always have discretion in that situation. If he felt that you ran the red light, regardless of speed or any other factors, he could still issue you the citation, but you would still have your opportunity in court to challenge that citation if you so choose.
Okay. And then if I get the ticket, then what ends up happening in court is that I either pay the ticket and take the penalty of it getting on my insurance points, or I choose to go to class and get reschooled and educated in that space, but I have a choice there. Where I'm going with this, and you can tell me yes or no.
No, you're correct.
Okay. Where I'm going with this is that in both options, it's going to cost me about $350 or $400. I'm rounding up, $250 to $400, depending on what the citation is and if there's late fees and everything else. But I'm just I'm putting a picture out there. When cameras are placed in areas of underrepresentation or in poverty areas, and it seems like when looking at the map that my older area and Maryville and those areas, then if they get a citation, and that's where I'm going for leading with education, is because they can't necessarily be able to afford that ticket or that class, but they need to figure out how to do it because they need to drive. And so that's why I'm putting the scenario there, because we do need to at least have some educational piece, especially in those areas where possibly there's a language difference and there are different standards in different countries. Puerto Rico just happens to be a territory and is part of the United States and follows by the rules, but or has the same standards of traffic and lights and everything, but for some reason it's a little different on an island in driving, and it's a little bit more aggressive. But I'm just saying, we have the same rules across the city, and there's, for whatever reason, more aggressiveness happening in certain parts, or assertiveness, and we need to educate, when you do this behavior, this is what's going to happen, and this, now you're racking up fines. I just want to be able to be clear as we move and discuss this program, how we're going to look at those different type of scenarios. So thank you. Thank you for listening to me. And safety is number one.
If you'd like, I'd go to the next slide. It's kind of our last slide here is really looking at overall automated enforcement feedback. So I put some ideas on here. Obviously, the part we would want to do is have performance metrics. If this is something that we move forward with this program, is it actually having the effect? And that's something we would be able to provide reports on, come back to the council and let you know, this is what we're seeing when it comes to speeding or red light running or whatever enforcement we would move forward with. And that goes back to that regular evaluation reporting. And then going back to that high injury network map with the equity areas as well, balancing those safety and equity concerns, and how do we do that as a city? And then city administration staffing, I mentioned before that if it went forward to the program, you would need dedicated staff within the police department and the courts system to be able to process this, especially how it a much larger program than we had previously. So that's something we'd have to be evaluated, but that's what we would expect the program to be able to cover the cost of initially, to be able to administer and manage the program. So I'll pause there. I know this is kind of more of the catch-all comments that you might have on automated enforcement.
Thank you, and I appreciate it. Especially if we look at doing education before enforcement, that might be a way for us really to look at performance metrics and be able to evaluate to see if our automation is helping with regards to traffic safety. So I think if we did what you proposed, Councilwoman, in looking at some type of education prior to any kind of enforcement, we might be able to really look at getting some good data. So I certainly would support that. Are there any other, Councilwoman?
Yeah, I just think it might be helpful if the community also understands how those metrics would apply.
Yeah.
Whether or not if we I'm just throwing out numbers here, making it completely up. Say, for example, we set a goal, if we do this, that what we hope to show is that if we implement these strategies, we see a reduction in pedestrian fatalities and serious accident by, say, 20%, I'm making it up. And if we see, and we say, if we only see a reduction if we see a reduction that's less than 5%, we decide the program is not working and we come back and reevaluate. I think that's helpful so everyone knows that what is the intention going forward as we lay out this program.
Thoughts, Councilwoman Pastor?
I just think you've heard a lot from us and a lot of concerns, so I don't think this is ready to, in my eyes, there's still a lot more questions. And what I mean is, how is this going to be developed, I guess? And you're in front of the committee asking us, well, what would you like to see? I work in a very high level and then I go down. And what I mean by that is I like to see a plan. I like to see, okay, the types of enforcement. If you used all these types of enforcement, what does that look like? And what is the cost to all that? Then from there, when I have kind of some meat, then from there I can say, well, what happens if we take out speed on green? Is that really effective? Which top 3 are the most effective technology or enforcement items? What is needed and what is the community saying that we need? So that's just where my thoughts are in this whole dialogue and discussion. I think you've gotten some great feedback, but most importantly, what really needs to happen is it be equitable. Because the conversation in 2019, I was the one who sat in a committee and voted yes, and then at the end I voted no, because once I got more information and how things were determined and where these red lights were determined and how there was a lack of data and a number of things, and I moved to no because of that and because of several things that were going on. So my thing is, it shifted a bit because of that, now we're collecting data, and now we're looking at different pieces and making sound decisions. And so I still need more. I don't necessarily need more information. I just want to know what we want, and I'm not sure if we're there yet on how, but the way we get there is when we get more information from staff to say, okay, this is what we think it should look like. And I know you're coming for us for pieces. My thing is school enforcement.
So you're looking at scenarios, I take it. Okay. Are you able to do that, looking at if we did everything down to if we just did this?
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, I think the main concern, we didn't want to go forward with a box that doesn't look like the box that you guys want. And so I think hearing the feedback and the input that you provided today, that helps us better define what we would potentially put there. And I think we could develop 2 or 3 boxes of scenarios that would be able to give you an idea of what we might be able to move forward with.
And then that's something after we have the discussion, maybe we can take out then to the public.
That's what I was going to ask. I was going to ask, at what point does the public give an opinion? Do they give an opinion at the very beginning, in the sense of you get a sense of where the public's at, or what type of technology and options that they're looking at? The same kind of like what you're doing with us, would you do that with the community? So then you have a broader sense of what is needed, not what's going on, but what is needed, and on a safety piece, be able to provide these information on a safety piece, and then come back with us and say, here's what we've heard, or do you take what we have and then do the magic of bringing something back and then we throw that out to the public? I don't know.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, I think what you outlined is having scenarios. I mean, we as staff can go and develop those scenarios, some ideas, so it has more focused and input that we might be getting from the public. So I would suggest we probably go to the public after we've developed those scenarios and some options. So rather than coming here with 25 different things to look at, here's 3 or 4 things that would we really want that input from them then. And then whether that happens before a council, here's this, that's really up to the council.
Okay. Okay, Councilwoman.
The only thing I would want to add is...
Chairwoman? Oh.
Sorry, go ahead. I'll let O'Brien go. Go ahead.
Oh, it's okay. I can wait.
Thank you. The only thing I would add is, as we're looking at possible updated data, I think we should also look to see some of the issues, whether or not there's anything else that can be done, whether or not it's engineering or design components, and just so that and other alternative modes. I know we've talked a lot about actual enforcement through these cameras, and whether or not there's anything else that can be done, I think might be helpful for us to understand as a subcommittee, as well as for our community members to understand as well.
If I may, Madam Chair, Councilman Washington, and members of the subcommittee, our department is doing a lot of engineering improvements around the city and looking at the same data and making the right decisions on what's the right solution for those situations we're seeing out there. So that's happening as we speak. So it doesn't necessarily need to wait for this program. And I wouldn't want to target this program to an issue that isn't going to be addressed by red light running cameras or by speed enforcement. We'd want to target the right solution for the right problem we're having on our roadway. So yes, that is definitely happening.
I figured as much, but I think it might be more so helpful for not just us to know, but the public to understand that as well. So thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Councilwoman O'Brien?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could just go back to the education piece in it, and I do appreciate that idea. I thought it was great when the state did it related to, using your cell phone. I would like to propose that staff also look at, is it possible that that educational component be, not just a time, but instead if somebody gets, they don't get actually charged or cited until their second or third, their third offense potentially. So they kind of get a, 2 strikes, it's the third strike where you have to pay something, so that we make sure there's really that education going on. So if they could just evaluate that as one of the options, I would be appreciative of it.
Actually, that's I think a good idea. We should probably look at that and add that into a scenario on how we would do potential enforcement versus educational and enforcement. But I understand what you're saying. It's kind of like strike 3, you're out. So.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, please, Councilwoman.
Oh, well, the public still, I can hold back.
Okay. We do have some speakers, so let's go to them. So first, Ed Hermes, is he here? I don't.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
You're on phone. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't get the computer audio working. Yes, hi. Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today and appreciate the public's involvement here. My name is Ed Hermes. I'm a member of the Vision Zero Street Safety Committee, which I very much appreciate the city setting up. One of my other hats I wear is I'm the president of the Osborne School District Governing Board, so I really appreciate the conversation, especially around safe routes to school. Quick aside on that, we would love to see the city bring back the Safe Routes to School coordinator again. The city used to have a really great coordinator named Don Cross. We worked with extensively. We just put in a hawk light in the Osborne district, working very closely with Don. That position's been vacant for quite some time. We'd love to see that filled. Anyways, back to automated enforcement. We had a really nice presentation in our Vision Zero Street Safety Committee on this program, and I came in with a really open mind about it. But by the end of the presentation, I was convinced that this is something that needs to move forward. The amount of street deaths and serious injuries right now is astronomical in the city of Phoenix, and we are unfortunately one of the highest, if not the highest, number of per capita street deaths and injuries due to cars on our streets. So something needs to be done. Other cities are using this technology to great effect. We're seeing, lower street deaths in our neighbors who are using neighboring cities who are using this technology, and would encourage this committee and the city to move this forward. We do need more enforcement out there to keep our families safer. From a suggestion about working with schools and school districts, I would love that and welcome that. One of the difficulties about just tying it to school buses is that our buses only are running for a short period of time, and this issue is happening all the time. So appreciate you moving this forward and making our streets safer.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. Next is John McMullen.
My name is John McMullen. Thank you for letting me speak. Councilwoman Stark. Nice to see you again. I object to the red light camera system, and perhaps you'll recall some of our discussions some years back. I'm not going to go repeat any of the arguments that I made all the way up in the courts, all the way to the Arizona Supreme Court, because the city council or the city attorney can certainly rebrief you on all of those. But I want to come back to something that works, that would slow down the traffic, reduce the red light deaths and the statistics, and is cheap. And you don't have to have this high-priced enforcement system. And that is, you put in speed bumps. And if you'll recall back in some of our discussions several years ago, I wanted the city to do it just in one high-risk intersection. Just one, to test it out. And maybe you have to vary the speed bumps. Maybe you've got to do something with the pavement in front, a certain distance in front of the red lights. But if you put in, for instance, those hash marks that tell you when you're off the side of the road in the highway, and started with that, and maybe had a little speed bump, and then a bigger one, and then as you come in and approach the intersection, you have the biggest speed bump. Guaranteed that's going to slow the traffic down. And even if they have an accident, if you recall this discussion, they're going to be going so slow you're probably not going to have any fatalities. So you've eliminated the whole problem by just using an expeditious set of speed bumps. And that ought to be done, and I would ask the city, before you do any of this thing, try it in one high-risk intersection. Am I out? Oh, okay. Well, there you are. Try it in one intersection. Thank you, and nice to see you again, Councilwoman Stark.
Thank you. The next speaker, James Farley.
Good morning, committee, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm Jim Farley. I'm a member of the Vision Zero committee as well, but I'm speaking on my own behalf. I've been deeply involved with the issues and problems of red light camera enforcement for many years, including my 3 years in Phoenix. I know what I'm talking about. Having met with you either directly or through your staffs, you know what I'm talking about as well. There are many problems in this report today. I will address two. As this proposal now stands, Phoenix is on a trajectory to create an enforcement program that will trap many good drivers into violations only tenths of a second into the red because the yellow is still too short, especially the left turn arrow, regardless of the city's study. The trapped drivers' fines will be the cash cow for the camera companies and the city, while the cameras will do little to nothing to prevent serious crashes. This can be mitigated with a proper grace period as one solution, but so far, I'm just seeing this issue swept under the rug like it doesn't exist. In the report, the Streets Department acknowledges that the presence of a red light camera increases rear-end collisions, and that the property damage and minor injuries it causes is an acceptable trade-off for the reduction of violent crashes. How is an engineering system that creates any type of a crash, how is that okay? A rear-end collision can create much more than a minor injury. It's also very specious that the other half of the trade-off, reduced violent crashes, actually happens. A camera cannot prevent an impaired or distracted driver from entering the intersection. completely unaware that the light's red or that there's a camera there. This is it's a morality issue for the city. Do we really want a system that traps many safe drivers and saddles them with an unwarranted fine, or that is acknowledged to cause rear-end collisions? I don't think so. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Jay Beaver.
Thank you. Good morning. I just want to start with thanking the council members that met with us personally and their staff for the generosity of your time and that you spent on this issue with us. Again, as a member of the City's Vision Zero Advisory Committee, but speaking for myself today, it's nice to hear that there's going to be more information brought back and not moving forward directly with something today. But I want to point out that engineering countermeasures are more effective in reducing red light running than ticketing cameras. That's not to say that there is no place for enforcement. Of course there is. We definitely need more police officers, and we support the use of police officers in terms of traffic enforcement as opposed to ticketing cameras. But considering automated enforcement at this time is premature, since the city has yet to complete the rollout of the longer yellow intervals and intersection improvements under the Road Safety Action Plan. Until those engineering countermeasures are complete and have been evaluated, the city will have no rational basis for where to place any cameras or even if they are necessary. The 3 years of historical collision data will be meaningless because the engineering improvements will likely change accident patterns. With regards to equity issues, the fines and increased insurance premiums associated with automated ticketing have been shown to disproportionately affect low-income and minority communities, regardless of how evenly they are placed throughout a city. The majority of high-risk roads and intersections are located in minority neighborhoods, primarily due to a long-standing lack of investment in road safety infrastructure. City officials are promising to locate the cameras at the most dangerous intersections. As a result, the automated ticketing cameras will primarily be placed in low-income and minority communities. Residents will be subjected to a massive new ticketing campaign, with the revenue supposedly being utilized to fix the problems initially created by the government's lack of investment. Consequently, minority communities will have suffered twice, initially through the lack of investment that resulted in higher injury and fatality rates, and subsequently through the accumulation of millions of dollars in fines and fees to remedy the government's historic neglect.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jane. I hope I pronounced this correctly. Breakkaran. I apologize in advance if I butchered your name.
Oh, no, that's fine. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for listening to me. Part of my comments, this gentleman right here just said, basically to increase the length of time of the yellow light so people have more time to get through. Because if you're just starting and it turns yellow, if you can't get through. So, like, I agree, you get a ticket, an unpaired ticket. But the other thing is you can't really slow down when it's still green because somebody will hit you from behind. But another point I wanted to make that's really on my heart, and it may not be the right place to say this, but the problems I see are with people jaywalking. I live in Glendale, and I drive into Phoenix frequently. I use Olive Dunlap, same street, go to 17 and come into Phoenix. And especially around 35th Avenue to I-17, there is so much jaywalking. Well, I see it everywhere, especially around I-17, but it's so dangerous. And I don't know actually if there's any law against jaywalking, so you could be ticketed for it. But I don't, like, these cameras are not going to do anything for the jaywalking issue. And every time I come into Phoenix, I see at least one or two. One time I saw 7. And the other, Monday, I was driving, and this guy was weaving in and out, was just walking in and out the traffic. And he just walked right in front of me. If the light had turned green, there's no way I would have seen him or been able to stop. So So I don't really have any suggestions other than maybe more police officers at some of these bad intersections. But I do think something needs to be happening because people are going to get killed. And especially at night, because these people wear dark clothes. You can't see them. They just walk right in front of you. So that's my biggest concern. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. The next speaker, Marissa Hamilton.
Chairwoman, members, I want to start off saying that I am a strong supporter of public safety. I was previously endorsed by the Arizona Police Association, and I'm also a victim of a terrible car accident from years ago from a red light runner, and I have permanent back damage from that. And because of that, I am personally invested in making sure that we have the right options to protect us on our streets. But red light cameras don't actually do that. What I heard today was that primarily you're looking for surveillance. I heard today that most of these accidents are in areas where the streets haven't been maintained. And I heard that you needed to do something, but really it's been several years that we've known that the streets need to be maintained, that they don't have the right engineering. And no one has taken the time to fix these roads. That's pathetic. That is not what our city is supposed to be doing. When I was here at the city council working in constituent services in 2019, we didn't renew that contract because the citizens were wildly opposed to having surveillance and not having our roads fixed. We should not be spying and ticketing as if that's a solution, because people that plow through red lights don't care if you take their picture. It doesn't stop them from killing someone. They literally just typically don't care unless it's a situation that Councilwoman Laura Pastor described where you're trying to make a decision to not get hurt. The numbers that you gave us was that there is only 1.5 accidents a month that this is what you are concerned about. And again, it's been several years, so why haven't you fixed the roads? Alternatives that you can do are putting signs up informing drivers that this is a dangerous intersection, putting just a speed monitor, not something that's surveillance that spies on them. Do a pilot with the yellow light extensions and warning signs. Oh, again, watching bad accidents doesn't save lives. As far as constituent contacts, you've received over 8,252 contacts from constituents with nearly 7,000 emails. We haven't even started contacting voters, and we already have almost 1,000 people have signed a petition against this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all our speakers, and so I think, oh, we have another one? Oh, I apologize. Jeff Codwell. Sorry about that.
You're all right, thank you. Chairwoman, council members, the main thing that I heard today is the concern about enforcement, and Councilwoman Hodge-Washington wanted specifics regarding enforcement mechanisms. So if we research this issue, the Arizona State Senate issue brief on November 10th, 2022, it's a 2-page document for photo traffic enforcement, states in the bottom left-hand corner, a person who receives a notice of violation in the mail for speeding or running red lights that is obtained using photo radar does not have to respond to the notice or identify who is in the photo. The notice must state that the notice is not court-issued documentation, and the recipient is not obligated to identify the person or respond. But failure to respond may, not shall, result in official service that may result in additional fees being levied. Alternative or substitute forms of service of process may be used to notify an individual of a photo enforcement violation citation. An individual's driving privileges may not be suspended or revoked as a result of a citation that is served by alternative services, I think E, of process, so electronic processes. This is not going to change anything. So we need more police officers. The only way that we can change things is if we have police officers pull people over, issue tickets in person, and this is azledge.gov. This is off of our state government's website. So I have a lot more to say. I'll email the rest over. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think we have a direction. I think what I like to see, though, is have the scenarios come back to us so we can narrow them down and then take them out to the public per district, kind of what we did with the drone policy. So is that acceptable?
Mayor, I'm sorry,
Okay.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I think that's acceptable. The only thing that I would want to make sure that the subcommittee is okay is that we do want to check with your colleagues and see about putting this out for a policy discussion or something to get everyone's input on this, so then we can come up with the scenarios. So that we're not just focused on what we've heard today, we can get other input and then develop the scenarios and go out for that public input pursuant to your guys' direction, but we do want to make sure that we get the full council, input on it.
I appreciate that, and then you can come back with us kind of with a deadline where you think you'll be back at this subcommittee. So I thank you, and I love that Keeney keeps shaking his head knowing he's leaving. But thank you, and thank you, Keeney, for all your years of service with the city. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Next is item, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to make something clear.
I apologize.
Are you asking, are you saying we need to now go to a policy session?
No, he's just going to make
Okay.
the rounds.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So, yeah, Madam Chair, and Councilman Pastor, either way, we will.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that we are getting input from all of the council members. If they want to be a policy discussion, then we can ask about that. If not, it can be individually, so that as we come back with the scenarios, we've got input from all the council districts to then bring those scenarios back and talk about how we would do outreach from there.
Okay, I was confused by that. That's why I was like, okay, well, you already had one meeting from, I can't remember, PSJ, I want to say, and then you had us, and so there's only a few of us that are not in the conversation, a formal conversation, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yes, and the only thing I would add, Madam Chair, Councilman Pastor, is that we, the presentation we gave to PSJ was not as deliberate about getting individual input. It was broader, bigger picture, since this is the subcommittee that the Streets Department reports to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Our next item is 8, zoning ordinance text amendment for parking reductions for multifamily affordable housing. We asked this to come to this subcommittee so we could dig deeper into the issue and try to address some of the concerns that came up at the villages. And I believe staff has done an analysis and they'll be presenting to us today. I'll turn it over to Alan. You can introduce.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Today, we have Mr. Josh Bednarik, Planning Development Director, Tricia Gomes, Deputy Director, and Chris DePero, one of our team leaders in the Planning and Development Department. And Tricia and Chris have been the primary leads on our parking text amendment. And as you stated, the council did request that this come to the subcommittee based upon input from the villages and council, what you were hearing. And we have a revised recommendation to put out there for further discussion. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Gomes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. So yes, we're here to present TA-8-23. So the original staff proposal, we just wanted to provide a summary of what was being proposed. It included multifamily housing that covered citywide, affordable housing, parking reductions citywide, the infill development district, which primarily focused on our transit areas, walkable urban code market rate, and walkable urban code affordable housing, And then just to clarify, because we did get some questions, this does not include downtown code because it already has reduced parking requirements and administrative options for further reductions. So what have we heard throughout the public process? Don't encourage on-street parking in single-family neighborhoods. Do people in affordable housing have fewer cars? Isn't it discriminating against them to have lesser parking requirements? It makes sense to reduce parking in transit-oriented areas, but maybe not quite as much as proposed by staff. And then why isn't there an administrative reduction for senior housing or other special needs populations? Mr. DePero is going to walk through the proposed modifications that we're bringing to you today for discussion based on what we have heard.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. I'll start with the multifamily development citywide proposal. The existing requirements are on the screen there. They're somewhat complicated, particularly in terms of enforcement. The original staff proposal was to, across the board, per type of, without differentiating between dwelling units, 1.25 spaces per dwelling unit. Planning Commission did not recommend this for approval. Staff are proposing 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit in response to that. The main reason being is if you look at the top of that slide, 1.5 spaces is what is currently required for 1 or 2 bedrooms, which is by far the majority of all units that we get in multifamily developments. Greater than 2 bedrooms is only a very small percentage, as well as efficiencies, which are primarily in downtown and therefore not subject to this requirement because they're in downtown code. And basically, when we've looked at some site plans, the math comes out about the same exactly, but it's far easier to enforce and it's more known for the customer. From the beginning, they rarely change number of units, but they often change bedroom counts. So this is a little bit more of something guaranteed from the beginning for the applicant, which is what we're proposing.
And can I just, my understanding is that you ran some scenarios with the 1.5 and it really kind of equals out to what we see with the old requirement or the existing requirements?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, yes, pulling existing site plans as well. Looking at the actual provided rate comes at like 1.47, 1.52, et cetera, in terms of what we get overall, as well as doing the math on like just a hypothetical one. The numbers are pretty statistically insignificant, but it is significantly easier to enforce.
I have a question. I know we're not there yet, but it's regarding the WU code. There's a possibility of, say, a 3-bedroom, because currently it said 2 spaces per 3+ bedroom. What does that do in the WU code, with the WU code?
Madam Chair.
And I can wait when we get there, but I just want you to, that's the question.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councilwoman Pastor. Shall I move? Okay. For item number 2, affordable multifamily housing citywide, the existing provision was that we have no reductions available for that, specifically for affordable housing, except in the WU code, which I'll hit a little bit later. Staff had proposed a 50% reduction of citywide requirements. Planning Commission did not recommend this for approval. And basically, staff's modified approval is that there's no reduction specifically for affordable housing. There is a different proposal staff have made regarding senior housing and other special needs populations, because as Deputy Director Gomes mentions at the beginning, basically there was a question of, and what we heard was that we heard special needs might be the way to go. So looking at this proposal, special needs populations is currently in the ordinance as people with special needs, but such as but not limited to disabled and elderly. The existing provision is that you may do so by going to a public hearing and obtaining a use permit. Staff have proposed up to a 50% administrative reduction, but only with a parking demand study that would be sealed by a traffic engineer addressing topics such as transit, typical usage by people of age, et cetera. And it would be sealed by a traffic engineer requiring them to basically be guaranteeing that they stood by that. For anything greater than 50%, staff have proposed still the use permit requirement, which is basically what we have now. In the infill development district, The current requirements for the city are the same as citywide, but you can actually count your on-street parking. The original staff proposal was to have a 50% reduction of citywide requirements, which actually was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission, and the modified staff proposal keeps this. So there was no proposed change at this time to that. Infill Development District is in the map on the screen if you want to see where that is. It's basically the transit-oriented areas. Walkable urban code. So let's talk about that. The existing requirement for market rate housing in the walkable urban code is basically a 25% reduction if you're close to a station and a 10% reduction from the citywide standard if you're a little further than a quarter mile. The original staff proposal was to take this to 0.5 spaces per unit. Planning Commission did not recommend approval, but did recommend approval of 0.65 spaces per unit, somewhat higher. Staff have actually modified that slightly and gone a little bit higher in terms of reconciliation. And what I mean by reconciliation is that I'm going to jump to the next slide real quick. There's an existing provision in the WU code for parking requirements for affordable housing. It's the only one that we have existing. And if you'll notice there in Transect 4, the requirement's 0.75. If staff proposed a 0.65, we'd have to then reconcile the existing affordable. What we did here was don't reduce the affordable. So this not only reconciles that, it also is a little bit more consistent with the recommended approval for the infill development district, because 0.75 is half of the staff proposed 1.5 units per acre. And basically, WU code is essentially permitted in the similar areas as the infill development district, transit-oriented areas. Going on to the WU code multifamily housing, affordable housing, again, the existing requirement is here. I'll just point out the T3 that's on the screen there is doesn't allow multifamily. Original staff proposal was to reduce it across the board. That was not recommended for approval by Planning Commission, and the modified staff proposal is to leave the existing ordinance alone. So other things in the text amendment, just to remind you, that were recommended for approval by the Planning Commission were parking for single-family detached housing. We made corrections for consistency. There were some definitions, there were clarifications made as necessary for implementation. There was an item for passenger loading zones proposed in WU code only. And then just to summarize everything for you after all that, what staff are currently proposing for discussion is multifamily housing citywide at 1.5 spaces per unit, affordable housing citywide, no reduction proposed. In the infill development district, 50% reduction from the citywide standard. The walkable urban code, market rate housing at 0.75 spaces per unit. Walkable urban code, affordable housing, no changes proposed to the existing ordinance. And then the new one, special needs populations, up to a 50% reduction administratively, but with a parking study submitted and approved by the department, and a use permit required for anything greater than 50%.
Thank you. Now, we have a number of speakers. You want to take the speakers, or should we ask questions now? Sure. Speakers, okay. And I do want to thank staff in advance for their analysis, but let's go with their speakers. So first, in support, Christian Solorio. Solorio, thank you. Oh.
You said that
How
right.
are you?
You're good. Thank you, Chair, members. Hi, my name is Christian Solorio. I am an architect who works in affordable housing, working with these specialty populations such as victims of domestic violence, seniors, chronically homeless, among others. I work throughout the state, including municipalities with no parking requirements or significantly reduced parking requirements like the Center Line overlay in Glendale, form-based code in Mesa, form-based code and affordable housing reductions in Flagstaff, city-wide senior housing parking reductions in Glendale. And parking presents a real barrier for new affordable housing. Mesa has an overlay in which all multifamily is granted 0 parking requirements. There I built a project where we provided 30 stalls for a 50-unit affordable housing project, and we were right-sized. Had parking reductions not been available, that project would not have been built. In areas WU Code parking reductions are granted, we've worked with financial institutions that deem the 0.5 stall requirement for affordable housing too low and mandate an increase of parking to have access to the loan. So if parking is not right-sized, it is not funded. There are many populations that need less parking: folks with disabilities, seniors, severely mentally ill, the chronically homeless, and parking reform gives the flexibility to affordable housing developers to right-size and to allow for increased density and reduced costs, as each stall can cost between $20,000 and $30,000 per stall. Since most affordable housing is on a fixed budget, there isn't the same profit-driven motive as market rate developers. That allows the money to stay where it matters: better amenities, better mechanical systems, longer lasting finishes, because that's where burdensome parking requirements have a real impact. And do not tie anecdotal parking shortages in one or maybe two LIHTC projects with an entire system. We do not subject the whole LIHTC program to criticism as a result of a property that is poorly managed or is not properly maintained. To close out, zoning rules and regulations that prevent new affordable housing citywide continue to perpetuate the socioeconomic and racial segregation by not allowing for equal opportunity for affordable housing throughout the city. Citywide affordable housing parking reductions are a direct solution to this, and would encourage you all to support it.
Thank you. I believe the Councilwoman Pastor has a question.
Can you, just for the public, what does right size mean?
Right size is, so basically it's done internally with a developer when in the absence of parking requirements, in which we look at the context of where the project site is, like where's the closest grocery store, bus station, how much does it work, and we work internally to provide the parking that is deemed appropriate for the population we're serving, where it's physically located, and that's really the process that happens in the absence of parking requirements.
Okay, just for the general public to understand
yes,
what right size means. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Nicole Rodriguez.
Hi, good morning, or now we're afternoon. Thank you, Chair and members. For the record, I have been working on this topic with staff and external stakeholders on this topic for about 2 years, directly working with Planning Director Josh Benrick before he was Planning Director, and stakeholders such as the AMA. And this is something that is very well vetted per staff's original recommendations. That's what I'm here to support. I'm not here to oppose the concept of parking reform. I'm here to actually support the original recommendations. I'm not in support of the current revisions that Planning Commission or staff have made. But something that I learned from this TA is that people are really emotionally attached to them, to parking. People can get furious about this topic. Cars are religion here, and no one is about taking cars away. And I think that's really been a misunderstanding about this parking reform text amendment. And we really haven't thought in a coherent way about how actually to provide parking when people really need it. The other thing is, parking is not shared per our codes. It's bulked into these fiefdoms. If I want to park at a salon, I know we're talking about housing, but bear with me here. If I want to park at a salon and the spots are possibly taken up, and then I go next door to maybe park at a doctor's office, even though there's availability, and the doctor's office is closed for the day, I'm actually not allowed to do that. That is not shared parking. We need to also be talking about that. Stop bulking this parking into the way we zone it today. And, I'm curious, for those who keep talking about disability needs and ADA needs, if they have consulted with any organizations or groups that support and advocate for disability needs. The Mayor's Commission on Disability Issues, or Ability 360. It seems to be pretty disingenuous to leverage a group of people who have not been consulted with. I'm sorry, I got a few more if someone could lend me their time, because there's a lot of inaccuracies from the village planning committees. I serve on them, and I'm tired of anecdotal lack of evidence arguments that we are entertaining today. So if I may, one more minute, please.
Thank you. Next speaker is Ed Hermes. He's not on anymore? Okay. He said he supports. Next speaker is Rockney Hanish. He's not on. He also supported. Next is Shane Gore. Shane is on. Welcome, Shane.
Morning, Chair, members. I just wanted to really quickly say, please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Staff spent valuable time researching this topic. They prepared a thoughtful recommendation that is supported by empirical traffic engineering data. Many of the arguments in opposition to this text amendment rely on emotional appeals rather than traffic engineering data. A reasonable outcome would be for this subcommittee to recommend the following: approve the parking reductions as staff originally proposed in the 4 villages that voted to recommend approval, and then direct staff to collect meaningful parking and development data and report it back to the village planning committees, the planning commission, and this subcommittee for future study and adjusting in those 4 villages or possibly expanding it citywide. Please consider recommending approval of this text amendment with the only modification from the original staff proposal being the villages where it will apply. Allow us to shape the future character of our own villages rather than having the core of the city being held back by outlying areas that have different perspectives and different challenges with regard to parking. Lastly, I would just like to request that the subcommittee explore how to reconcile the inexplicable separation between our street transportation department and other important transportation functions like public transit, light rail, and sustainability. A sustainable, connected city of the future needs a cohesive transportation plan that doesn't pit alternative modes against one another, and that's what we have now with the different departments. So thank you for allowing me to speak. And like I said, I would like you to vote to recommend approval of the original staff proposal in the 4 villages that voted to recommend approval. Maybe treat it like a pilot program, study it, see how it goes, make adjustments, or expand it to the rest of the city. Thank you again.
Thank you. Next speaker, Ryan Boyd.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Council Subcommittee. Ryan Boyd at 1069 West Taylor Street in support of a version of this, as you're probably going to hear many folks being torn between, frankly, what was very well researched and very well conducted staff proposals and, you know, some realistically needed modifications that have went through the system. I do want to really highlight, as other speakers have before me, the 4 committees that had actually done a full approval. I think 2 more also had approved this with modifications. The beauty of this, they're contiguous. So one of our biggest challenges here is we've heard throughout this process kind of the need for it in the central Phoenix area. No one has really contested that in my experience in the multiple committees and planning commission hearings that I've been to on this one, and really wanted to highlight that we've made all these investments in transit and other items like that, and need to allow the actual city development to be flexible in regards to meeting those needs. Further, this is really about freedom, right? This is the opportunity to build housing with the ability to say that, hey, not everyone wants to have a car, not everyone wants to basically be tied to having to pay for a parking spot. My own family has situations where they are paying because parking is not unbundled for parking that they cannot use because they cannot drive. They medically cannot drive. So it's a challenge that we're really trying to see here. I would also highlight here that if there does need to be a conversation about the WU code and the IDD, one of the biggest frustrations throughout this entire process has been that the WU code number, the staff one, came from a whole range of studies and research. Unfortunately, the one that we came up with at the Planning Commission was drawn out of a hat. So really, when we've heard the amount of desire for studies on so many of these topics, we recommend that the staff had actually studied the issue and did the right one in this case. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next speaker is Jay Beaver. I think he may have left. Okay. Then Marcia Bushing, she supported, I believe she left. Okay. Next, Patrick McDaniel. I see Patrick.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. For the record, my name is Patrick McDaniel. I'm speaking in my role as Director of Advocacy for Phoenix Community Alliance, and I live in the Garfield neighborhood of downtown Phoenix. as many of us in here know, that the text amendment, parking reduction text amendment, was quite an involved process that has taken many months to come to where we are today. I had the opportunity to attend multiple planning committee hearings, and I'd like to echo kind of the sentiment of some of the previous speakers. Please, while deciding such an important, I would say, milestone for future planning in the city of Phoenix, please listen to the facts. Please listen to the experts. Anecdotal evidence, the loudest voices in the room, sometimes are not the people to listen to. The presentation that we've had from city staff are well researched, well thought out. But please, as we move forward with this will be a highly contentious issue. We just ask you to please listen to the facts and base your decisions upon peer cities, cities that are the same size as Phoenix that are going through similar situations. Phoenix is an evolving city. Certain areas of Phoenix have requirements that are different than other areas of Phoenix, and other speakers have spoken about perhaps the four villages moving on their own. That would be something that City Council obviously has to decide. But as we move forward, please, facts only. This should be an emotion-free decision. We're talking about building the future of our city. So with that, thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, Sandy Gruno.
Thank you very much. My name is Sandy Gruno. I'm with the Phoenix Mid-Century Modern Neighborhood Association. I have been to many of the village meetings and additional meetings about this. There seems to be an urban myth that those in need of affordable housing have fewer cars or do not have cars nor trucks. I wish to dispute that. I have a family member who is SMI, seriously mentally ill. He's unable to take transportation unless he knows the driver or those riding there for a Lyft, and Uber and light rail are not a consideration. Another family member can no longer walk unassisted. We must use the family car. The same would be true for many of our veterans and those requiring affordable housing. Public transportation is not a remedy for the entire community, and my sense is that this has now been recognized. If handicap parking is reduced or eliminated, the affordable housing becomes unusable and unmanageable for many disabled persons, including veterans and the elderly. It's undesirable because it does not support their activities of daily living. That is discrimination. I understand that there have been many changes made to the original document, and I really appreciate the changes that were made regarding parking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I assure you, we cannot violate the American Disabilities Act when it comes to parking for handicapped people. We would be in serious trouble. We will not break that law. Thank you. Thank you for your comments on that. Larry Whitesell? Out by Paul. So if Paul wants to get ready. I thought he was. Yeah. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present today, Madam Chair and committee members. Let me find my notes. I'm Larry Whitesell, the co-chair of the Peak Neighborhood Association and a member of the Neighborhood Coalition of Greater Phoenix. And I really want to thank staff for the modifications that they have made, even from what the agenda item states would be presented today. We are in supportive of the staff recommendations that you've heard presented today. Our coalition members attended 10 of the 14 Village Planning Committee meetings that took place in July. We also attended and spoke at the Planning Commission meeting, and we were happy with the outcome of what came out of the Planning Commission. So we are supportive of that, but more supportive of what you've heard today. There is one small detail that we would like to have considered. And again, this is in the effort of being consistent And that's what I think the staff has tried to do. It's a small point, but the infill project statement in the text amendment is a half a mile from light rail. Everything else is based on a quarter of a mile. The walkable urban code is based on a quarter of a mile. So we would like to just see that adjustment made, that it be consistent with the walkable urban code in the infill district. And staff can clarify that. I see puzzlement on their faces. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Paul Davenport. And then Neil, you're next.
Paul Davenport, 3420 North 42nd Street. My starting point is that the Planning Commission's recommendation is a measured approach that is both prudent and a workable compromise. It would reduce the minimum parking requirements in areas where reduced minimums might work because of those areas' greater density and their more prevalent access to mass transit. On the other hand, the Commission's recommendation appropriately would not reduce the minimum requiremements in most other parts of our very large city. Reductions in those areas would not work for residents who are reliant on cars due to unwalkable distances, inadequate transit availability, and other circumstances. Related to that, please note that most of our VPCs rejected the citywide approach originally recommended by staff. The staff today has put a modified proposal on the table that merits further study. At first blush, it's an improvement over the original staff proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Neil Haddad.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Neil Haddad with the Neighborhood Coalition of Greater Phoenix, and also my home neighborhood association, Arcadia Osborne Neighborhood Association. So the Neighborhood Coalition supports the staff recommended changes to the Planning Commission's proposal. Mr. Whitesell mentioned the one change that we would like to see that relates to the infill development district on a half mile and going to a quarter mile to make it consistent with what is proposed in the WU code. You know, look, to proponents of this, we see this as a step forward. We think that this is a really good way to go. You've proposed something, and this allows for a concentrated area, mostly downtown and uptown, midtown, where there is access to transit. So let's see how this goes. Let's see how it works. We see that as a compromise. I just do have to say something about relying on lenders. You know, in 2008, we had the subprime mortgage crisis created by lenders. It resulted in a huge sell-off by home builders so that they weren't going to be stuck with excess inventory. We are still paying for that now, and it's why there is a shortage in the housing supply right now. So relying on lenders to set the standards just doesn't make sense to a lot of us. So with all that, you know, we've mentioned some other things about people who need cars in affordable housing areas. So with that, you know, our recommendation, please approve the staff's recommendations that were based on the Planning Commission's approval and recommendations. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Jeff Cogwell, followed by Jane. Jane, you'll be next.
Chair, council members, please do not move forward with action on this item, and if you do, vote no. 10 of the eligible 14 village planning committees voted to not recommend moving forward. 1 out of those 10 did say to move forward with modification, so we have 9 out of 14 denying it outright. The overall vote total for those who voted no or voted no with, or unless there's modifications, was 45 yes, 70 no, and 2 were neutral. So the village planning committees are those who are supposed to be closest to their communities. The government is supposed to listen to those who are the closest to their communities. And I would highly encourage you to listen to the overall vote of the village planning committees. The interesting fact is I actually do travel through affordable housing areas frequently, and there are tons of cars all over the place. And so the reason why is because people who live in affordable housing tend to live with roommates. And so if we actually reduce parking for people who live in affordable housing, we're impeding on people from making a living. Another fact is Vice Chair Ansari posted on her X account on July 18th an article from AZ Central where she is then quoted saying, "The entire purpose of light rail and public transportation is to encourage people to not utilize cars ultimately." So this is a move to ban cars. And that is a fact, and it is stated by Vice Mayor Ansari. Thank you.
Thank you. Jane Brickrion, I'm still not saying your name right, I'm sure.
Hi, thank you for hearing me again. I would like to encourage you not to make any reductions in parking. In fact, for apartment areas, I've lived in one, I think they need to be more parking. One of the previous persons said that it's an emotional issue. Well, I've lived through it, so I know. And it's emotions lead to anger, and then anger leads to violence. What happened to me was I had assigned parking. I came home from work. Somebody was in my parking spot, so I honked at them, made a move. They were not happy. Then the next morning I came out and my car had been broken into. And anything valuable that they didn't want, they just threw all over the place. And the other thing is, my previous point was, if you have less cars in an area, you have more people walking on the streets, and then you have more jaywalking, and so you have more potential of people getting hit, because jaywalkers do not look, they just walk right in front of you. They go against the lights. Sometimes they walk opposite direction in what cars are going. So I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And our last speaker is Marissa Hamilton.
Thank you, Chairwoman and other council members. Someone said previously that having cars is that people get emotional about it and it's like a religion. I find that statement a bit repugnant. Some of you may know my story, but I will repeat it for those that don't. Having a car when I was especially poor meant that I could escape from domestic violence and have a safe place to sleep, rather than having to stay in a situation where someone is trying to murder me in my sleep. Having a car is emotional. It means that you have a pathway out of poverty. It means that you have a way to start a small business. It means that you have a way to be able to pursue the American dream, or whatever your dream may be. And freedom isn't taking things away from people. If people don't want to have a parking space and they don't want to have to pay for it, I totally get that. But there's better ways to solve that problem, like letting them transfer that space to someone else, or giving them a discount, or having open parking. There's a lot of better solutions than trying to put people that are already in an affordable housing situation into further poverty. I question whether you've done whether the staff has done door-to-door surveys with residents. I don't think you should be listening to the activists. I think you should be listening to people that actually have to live with the decisions that you're making today. This agenda, clearly from what we've heard today, is about taking cars away. And if people can't park their cars, they can't own them, which means they can't get a better life for themselves. As I've driven through some affordable housing units lately to look at this agenda item and really hear from the other side, I didn't see any empty parking lots. In fact, I saw that they needed more parking. So I highly encourage you to listen to the village committees that opposed this. They did so because the people don't want it. And we need to prioritize helping people get out of poverty and staying safe, and cars do that for them. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all I have for speaker. Okay, thank you. So I want to thank staff. I know that you did listen to the village, and you did increase the number for overall parking for our multifamily that we see in the typical rural, or not rural, suburban areas. I especially want to thank you for taking a look at special needs. As a member of that population, and Councilwoman Pastor always smiles when I say that, but I am elderly, and as our population now ages, and there's a lot of us baby boomers, we're going to need housing. It's going to have to be affordable, so I appreciate you taking a look at that. For a number of years, we've allowed special needs to go through a use permit, and I asked neighborhood service to look at it. We've never had a complaint. We've never had a problem. So I appreciate you looking at a way to address that. And so thank you for taking care of me and special needs population. I also appreciate that you did an analysis taking some of the existing multifamily we have to see if the 1.5 would work, and it appears that it does work pretty much throughout the city, so thank you for that as well. I am going to support your proposal. I know that the villages did a lot of work, and their concerns, I think, have been addressed in your modifications. But with that, I'll turn it over to the other council. They may have questions or thoughts, and so Councilwoman Hodges-Washington.
I just had one question based on the public comments that we did hear regarding the infill project, whether or not that was an intentional decision to designate 1.5 miles from a light rail versus 1/4, or I'd love to hear that.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Hodge-Washington, the infill boundary as it's depicted in the text amendment is what the infill boundary is today. We aren't proposing any modification of that. There certainly could be, as part of a future text amendment, some analysis about aligning the WU code boundaries and the infill boundaries and our single-family attached boundaries. But there would also need to be some analysis about a Prop 207, whether or not we'd be taking rights away. So that's why we're not changing, we're not expanding or contracting that boundary as part of this text amendment. It stands as it is today.
My second question is, I guess I didn't, maybe I missed it in the packet, but the special needs population and the revised staff proposal that we were talking about, that I didn't see the actual language in the packet. Did I miss it?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Hodge-Washington, we were just presenting the concept today. Okay. What we would do as if the subcommittee is inclined to give direction to us to move forward with incorporating these, we would prepare that language as part of a memo for the full council to consider when this goes to formal.
Okay, thank you. That's for that clarification, because it specifically there was I wanted to make sure that if our special need population was limited simply to disabled and elderly, or would we also include, my preference is to include additional populations that may be benefited by this, such as transitional housing or individuals.
Go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, Chris.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Hodge-Washington, the concept that is there currently, there is a reduction and there's a definition, well, it's sort of a definition, but it says special needs populations included but not limited to elderly, disabled, and what we would likely propose would be a clause and putting in as a definition that would say, or as otherwise approved by the zoning administrator.
Okay, because that's why I was flipping through the packet to make sure I had missed that definition, because I wanted to make sure I understood what that definition was. So thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
I appreciate that clarification as well. There is a shelter up in District 3 in and around Bell Road, and they took advantage. They are special needs, and so they did have to go through a use permit back in the day, but I think this would help them today. Councilwoman Pastor.
Yes.
And then after you, I'll go to Councilwoman O'Brien.
Oh, you can go ahead because I
okay,
probably have
Councilwoman
20 million
O'Brien.
questions.
Did you call on me?
Yes,
Sure.
I did. Thank you.
Okay, so I have a question about the change to the citywide requirement. And there was a comment about, we don't have very many 3+ bedroom units. And I wonder if there was, when you looked at that, did you look at the places where there are a lot of bungalows for rent? We have a lot of those in District 1, and we have more and more folks who are, families moving into those apartments because they can't afford to buy houses in the north part of the valley. So I'm concerned about the impact where we are not as walkable as it is downtown.
Madam Chair and Councilwoman O'Brien, we did look at a bunch of existing sites, some older, some newer. One of the things we found is in some of the districts where we've been seeing a lot more of what we call it almost looks like a single-family home, but they're all rentals. They're often built like single-family homes, and they have some more bedrooms. They typically want to do that, and they're typically providing 2 spaces, if not more, because they want to mimic having a driveway and a 2-car garage. They tend to be providing them because keep in mind that nothing we've proposed has any caps. It simply has the minimums. And when you look at a typical multifamily development, typically we're seeing about 10%, if not less, in terms of 3 bedrooms. About 80% or so, if not more, tend to be 1 and 2 bedrooms. And frankly, outside of downtown, there's very few efficiencies. There are some older ones, but in the last 20-some years that I've worked for the city of Phoenix, very few efficiencies, which would require only 1 space, are provided outside of downtown. So when we modeled some based on the percentages, the numbers came out pretty close to identical in terms of the total number of spaces required.
And that was for citywide, correct?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman O'Brien, yes, we did take a sample from all around the city.
And would it be difficult to look more specifically at District 1?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman O'Brien, no, it wouldn't be particularly difficult to pull more site plans from there.
Okay. I support, making some changes, but I do have some concerns. So I may be voting no today and with the thought that I might change my mind after I'm able to have more discussion about the specific data in District 1 related to how it will impact our area. Thank you, Councilwoman, or Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go. I have a question actually about obviously the 3+ bedroom. It's being recommended 1.5 spaces per dwelling, and I know that's the minimum. But what will happen to us will be, and anybody in the future, will be from a developer side saying, well, the minimum's 1.5, and that's what we want. And then it becomes a push-pull-me between the elected, the neighborhood, and the developer. And I have a concern with that because I've been in many of those situations. So I don't know what that compromise is for, in particular, a 3+ bedroom, but I would like research done for that by the time we get back up to council. So those are my comments on the 3+ bedroom. I have the bigger concept or question I have is I have an infill project that is in the WU code, that is in the multi-family housing, and at market rate and affordable, all in the same space. What one applies to that?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, there is language in the original draft that does make clear that the reductions do not overlap with each other. They're not reductions upon reductions. So if we're located in the WU code, it would be essentially the WU code requirement. Otherwise, then, if you have a development that has combination of both affordable and market rate, they would be separate calculations based on the affordable versus the market rate. So they would be in terms of two sets of split calculations with that. That is currently how it is done under for certain other types of things with density for affordable housing. There are separate calculations.
And then where does infill come to play?
Excuse me, Councilman Pastor, I forgot to address that. Infill Development District also does not overlap. So WU code does often overlap. Infill is not a reduction of reduction. If it's WU code, it would definitely be WU code. If it's not zoned WU code, but in the Infill Development District, it would be the Infill Development District reduction. And if it's not in either of those, it would be the citywide requirement.
Okay, I'm going to be that developer. I have a piece of property right now that I can think of that falls in WU code, infill, and both WU codes of market rate and affordable, all in one piece of land. So what happens?
Madam Chair.
I mean, which one, I guess where I'm going is, if I was a developer, I would be like, wait a minute, I want 50% of reduction of citywide requirements because I'm in the infield, but then I can go to the WU code and get 0.75 spaces, so I'm going to determine where I'm going to, and then I can go to affordable and say, wait a minute, there's no reduction. What do I do?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, if I may, just to clarify, for the walkable urban code area, unless you've rezoned to walkable urban code, and you've done the majority of the cases in the last couple of years, you don't have WU code by right. You have to rezone to walkable urban code. So if you're going to pick WU code, you would address that through the rezoning process, and that would be the horse you're going to ride in on. And so those would be the development standards. And as you know, Councilwoman, through the rezoning process, if a WU code, you could have an opportunity to enhance WU code standards as stipulations. So if parking were an issue in a particular site that wanted to pursue WU code through the rezoning, we could enhance those standards as a condition of the zoning through stipulations. So unless they're rezoning to WU code through a public hearing process, then they would, and they were in infill, then infill would apply. But I'll let Chris expand as our expert on it. I just wanted to emphasize that point.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Pastor, I would just like to point out that the draft language, like I said, did include that you don't get to get a reduction of a WU code if it happens to be in the infill development district. The language was explicit. Okay. And what staff's current proposal is, they'd be fairly close to identical because 0.75 is 50% of the citywide proposal. Okay. So it's sort of the same thing.
Okay. That's what I needed to know because I don't know what I'm just reading right here and I don't know what that is. I don't have the number in front of me. So I'm going to go one more. Same project. 3-bedroom. The 3-bedroom apartment. Now what happens?
In WU code in particular?
Well, okay, so what I'm hearing is if I choose WU code, then the multifamily development rules and the infill rules then go to the side. I am now just operating in WU code. Okay. I'm supportive of this, but I probably will, I'll tell you now, I probably will have some stips by the time we get to council, because I need to really understand the impact this is going to have on several projects that I can think of at this moment that are moving and that fall in different categories. What I wanted to say is I want to thank Nicole Rodriguez because she has been talking about this for actually more than 2 years with me, and want to thank her for her advocating, and it's taken this to this point. And more people are probably going to advocate for more. We got to a great compromise, especially on the citywide one. And so this is how, I always say, this is how government operates. When we're making policy, we take our steps forward, and then we do what we can at that moment, and then we look at other stuff, or we may have to change back. I don't know, but this is what we're doing at the moment in time. So I'm supportive of this. I just need probably some more clarity later on. Thank you.
One of the things I would suggest before we put it back on council is that you visit the council and just make sure they are comfortable and understand, so we could maybe delay it a couple weeks so you have the time to do that. I would appreciate it. That would also help you do the exercise in District 1 as well. Okay, perfect. So, and then we'll make sure we re-advertise and let everyone know when it does move forward to City Council. So with that, do I have a motion?
I move, I don't have the front page copy. Item, which item? 8.
Can I get a second?
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No. Me.
Thank you. So it's 3-1, it passes. Thank you. Again, make sure everyone knows when we get it to Council at Large. I appreciate your work on this. With that, we have called to public. I saw that Jerry and Jess left.
Madam Chair, they did leave a packet of information for you as well, though.
They're on the phone? Okay. Jeff Codwell? Oh, I'm sorry. We need to have the city attorney explain, call to public. I apologize.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. During citizen comment, members of the public may address the subcommittee for up to 3 minutes on issues of interest or concern to them. The Arizona Open Meeting Law permits the subcommittee members to listen to the comments, but prohibits members from discussing or acting on the matters presented.
Okay, thank you. Jeff Codwell.
Chair, council members. So I'm displeased with what I saw at the last vote there, but I am pleased that you are moving forward for more transparency regarding open meeting law. The open meeting law itself states that we need to have all documentation in order to have a better informed citizenry, maintain integrity of government, and to avoid being excluded. So we did get the notice, but we didn't get all the documentation. I am pleased to hear that staff will be moving forward to fix that issue. I am greatly concerned that City Council and subcommittees are moving forward with policies that are going to reduce driving abilities, capabilities, along with attempting to take cars off the road. People will still drive. And so if you do more research outside of what may be provided to you, you will find that areas that have implemented 15-minute cities, people are still driving. It creates more congestion. There are more injuries related to cars. One thing that I did want to touch on with the automotive enforcement is they use the term red light running crashes. So in order to be counted in that stat, somebody actually has to run the red light to even be counted. So they're not counting people if they don't run the red light when it comes to that type of injury, along with crashing. The data I agree with you, Councilwoman Hodge Washington is outdated, and it does need to be updated because they were using years 2016 to 2018. One thing that is extremely concerning that was kind of touched on but not hit on the head is Councilman Waring in the Public Safety Committee on October 4th brought before us the information that these cameras are recording all the time. They're not taking still shots. And so they are potentially storing every single license plate that drives through the intersection. They're recording everyone who walks through the intersection. This is a huge infringement on the Fourth Amendment, in my opinion. Again, I am not a lawyer. Those are a couple things that I think are very concerning, but I do highly recommend that we do not keep moving forward to the 15-minute city implementation of policy. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see Jerry or Jess. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize, Marissa. I didn't have you on the list. I apologize.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I have to adjust this. Thank you very much, Chairwoman and council members, for hearing public comment today. I just wanted to add on to my comments before because 2 minutes are just a little bit hard to talk about that entire agenda item on spy cameras being adopted into the city. One, I have a comment to staff. There was a few concerning comments that were made in the presentation that I think needs to be considered. One, the staff said that you wanted to present a plan before doing town halls and hearing from the people. I highly advise that you reconsider that position. The people pay your salaries, not the other way around. We need, and to our council members, we need you to advocate for your constituents when the city staff says, let's work around the public. We need you to ensure that we have public input before proposals are submitted and then just rushed through. Getting public input first, putting a proposal together, and then getting input on that proposal is a better plan, and that's traditionally how Phoenix has gone about doing its business, and I think we shouldn't change from that. And also, when I say public input, I don't mean the canned surveys that we've been seeing with a lot of the 15-minute city type policy positions that have been being put forth, especially in the general plan. The general plan includes no public safety, by the way. That's very concerning. Why do you have a general plan with no public safety? But in the surveys for that, you have canned surveys where we have to pick which bureaucrat project we like the best, not actually getting true input from the citizens. We need to get meaningful constituent feedback. And as much as I love safe neighborhoods, another comment was made that the priority is safety, but the priority is actually supposed to be the Constitution at the forefront. And as the previous speaker mentioned, the data collection that's coming from the proposed cameras is tremendous. These cameras can quickly be turned into a 15-minute city infrastructure. Phoenix has this as part of the general plan. It's called TODS. We have to be leading forward with a way that we're expanding freedom, not reducing it, not having our entire lives controlled by bureaucrats. And I really appreciate the work you have all done. For this, I know that you take a lot of time with your constituents and take a lot of feedback, and I have a high amount of respect for each and every one of you. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you, and I apologize that planning already left, but public safety is one of the many elements that is required under state law for the general plan. I don't think we have anything else. The meeting is adjourned.
Have a great view here. This also has an outdoor space that is